Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story, what if Harry Potter unleashed the old magic the ministry buried and sealed away forever? Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so no story ever slips past you. All right, let's begin. Chapter 1, the interdict. The house in Croydon had been dead for 3 days before anyone thought to send an Auror, and by the time Harry stood in its front room the smell had settled into the wallpaper. Not the smell of the body. The body had been carried out that morning under a sheet, and a ministry obliviator had already convinced the neighbors that old Mr. Pettibone had gone to live with a daughter in Kent. What lingered was the other thing, the thing that had brought Harry here instead of a junior from the desk pool. It sat under the ordinary rod of a shut-up house like a low note held too long. He had smelled it once before, years ago in a cave by the sea, and he had spent 5 years pretending he had forgotten. He crouched by the hearth and held his wand flat across his palm. Nothing, the tip did not warm. The rune band on the shaft, the standard field enchantment every Auror carried, did not so much as flicker. According to the wand, according to every instrument the department issued, the room he knelt in was as inert as a church on a Tuesday. No residual casting, no signature, no trace, that was the problem. A man was dead of no cause the healers could name, in a room scrubbed clean of magic by something that had left the low note behind, and the wand said there was nothing to find. You get anything? Ron filled the doorway, coat dripping, a mug of the neighbor's tea going cold in his fist because he was too polite to pour it out and too sensible to drink it. 5 years of this work had thickened him through the shoulders and put a permanent line between his brows, but he still could not stand in a dead man's house without holding something. The wand says the room's clean, Harry said. Then the room's clean. The wand's wrong. Ron looked at the tea instead of at him. Harry, come here, kneel down, don't cast anything, just breathe. Ron came because he always came and knelt and breathed, and after a moment the line between his brows deepened. That's damp, he said. That's a shut house, under the damp. I'm not smelling ghosts because you want me to. You smelled it in the cave, Harry said quietly, by the lake when we went for the locket. He had not meant to say it. The words came out flat and he watched them land, watched Ron's jaw work around the memory and then push it away the practiced way a man pushes away a debt he cannot pay. That was in fairy and dark water, Ron said. This is a granddad who died with his slippers on, he stood. The healers said heart, old men's hearts stop. We file it, we go home, and I don't have to write the word cave in a report and get looked at like we've gone soft. He was right about the report. That was the trouble with Ron. He was almost always right about the mechanical truths of a case and almost never willing to follow them anywhere large. Harry stood too, and the room turned around him, and the low note stayed exactly where it was, patient, indifferent to the wand in his hand and the ministry behind the wand. He walked the perimeter once more, not casting. He had learned over 5 years that casting was a kind of noise, and that noise drowned the quiet things. He looked at the mantel where the photographs had faded, at the chair worn to the shape of one body, at the salt line. He stopped. There was a line of salt along the inner sill of the front window, gray-white, pressed into the paint with a thumb. Not scattered the way a nervous witch might scatter it, laid, and over the salt so faint that it read as a scuff in the old gloss until the eye consented to see it. Someone had drawn a knot, 3 loops crossing 3 loops with a 4th loop that closed the figure by passing through all 6. No wandwork, no burn, no scorch, no residue. A thing made with a finger and a word, and the word had been the thing that mattered. Harry did not touch it. He looked at it for a long time, and the low note under the damp seemed to bend toward the knot the way iron filings bend toward a magnet held under paper. He rose and walked the house again, slower, reading it now the way you read a man's last hours rather than a crime scene. The back door had a salt line too, broken in one place where a thumb had smeared it, whether by the dead man or by whatever had come through. On the kitchen table, among the ordinary debris of a solitary old age, teacup, pill bottle, a folded racing page, lay a book that did not belong to that table or that life. It was hand-bound in cracked black hide, its spine titleless, its pages the color of weak tea, and it had been left open, and every visible line of it was written in a hand Harry could not read, in an alphabet that was not quite an alphabet, letters that leaned into one another like people bracing against a wind. Someone had pressed the book flat with the pill bottle to keep a particular page. In the margin of that page, in ordinary blue biro, in a shaking English hand, the dead man had written 3 words, "It hears me." Harry did not touch the book. He looked at the open page and at the salt lines that had been meant to keep something out, and at the smear in the salt where the keeping out had failed, and he built in his mind, without wanting to, the shape of an old man's last night. A man who had found something he should not have found, who had understood far too late what it was, who had drawn his grandmother's charms in a substance older than any charm and sat up waiting behind them, and who had been right in the end about the one thing he had prayed to be wrong about. Ron, he said, what draws a knot in salt to keep something out and leaves no signature at all? Ron came and looked and shrugged with his whole coat. Muggle superstition, old people do it. My gran did it for luck. Your gran drew this, Ron looked again, longer this time, and this time he did not shrug. No, he admitted, my gran drew a cross. He straightened. Harry, let's file it. They filed it. The Auror office at 7 in the evening had the particular exhaustion of a place that never fully emptied. Half the desks were dark and the other half were islands of lamplight where people who could not go home pretended they had a reason to stay. Harry's desk was in the corner by the window that did not open onto anything, a charmed square of whether the ministry preferred to a real sky. Tonight the charm showed rain, which was at least honest. He wrote the report the way you learn to write reports, which is to say he wrote the truth in a shape that would not cost him anything. Death by natural causes, no magical residue detected, sight cleared, memories adjusted, case closed. He did not write the word not, he did not write the word salt. He read it back and it was clean and it was a lie, and he had told enough of them by now that the telling did not slow his hand. A shadow fell across the parchment before he could seal it. Croydon, said Gawain Robards. He had a way of arriving at a desk that made the desk feel borrowed. Head of the Auror office for 4 years now, he had recruited Harry personally out of the wreckage of the war, sat across a table in a room that still smelled of smoke and said, "We can make you into something other than a symbol," and Harry had believed him, and for a while it had even been true. Robards was a broad gray man with a boxer's hands and a lawyer's patience, and he had taught Harry most of what Harry knew about surviving the ministry as opposed to the war, which were different survivals with different rules. You closed it fast. Natural causes, Harry said. There wasn't much to close. No, there wasn't. Robards picked up the report, read it without appearing to, set it down in exactly the place he had lifted it from. You're going to go down to records tonight. I might. You will find, Robards said, that some files ask you a question instead of answering one. When that happens, the correct thing to do is to stop asking. I know that is not in your nature. I recruited you partly because it is not in your nature. But I am telling you, as the man who has spent 4 years keeping your name off the wrong desks, that Croydon is a file that asks a question, and that the people who own the question do not answer to me and do not answer to the minister, and have been in this building a great deal longer than either of us and intend to be here a great deal longer still. Harry looked up at him. You know what killed him. I know that I don't want to know, Robards said, and I have made a long and comfortable career out of the difference. So have you, whether you admit it or not. You want the war to have meant something, and I understand that, and I am telling you that the way to make it mean something is to grow old in this office, signing off on natural causes and going home to a house that isn't on fire. That's the whole of it, Harry. That's the prize. A quiet life is not a small thing. Men died in front of you so that you could have one. Don't spit on it, chasing a knot in the salt. He had not mentioned the salt. Harry had not written the word salt. He kept his face still, the field still. He had spent 5 years learning and said, "How did you know about the salt?" Something crossed Robards' face and was gone, too fast to read, a man recalculating a sum he had thought was finished. It's in the site notes, he said. It isn't. I wrote the site notes. Then it's in someone else's. Robards straightened and the borrowed feeling left the desk, and he was again only the head of the office, tired and gray and holding his career the way Ron held the neighbor's tea because it was too late to put it down. Go home. That's not advice. Good night, Auror Potter. He went, and Harry watched him go and understood that his own recruiter had just warned him off a knot in the salt he had told no one about, and that Robards had not come to his desk out of Robards' own worry. Robards was a careful man who had survived 4 years at the top of a violent office by never carrying a message he could avoid carrying. Someone had sent him. Someone above the office, above the minister, in the part of the building that owned the questions, had heard within a single afternoon that Harry Potter had noticed a knot in some salt, and had reached down through 4 layers of the ministry to put a tired gray man in front of his desk and tell him to stop. That was not the behavior of an institution protecting a secret it thought was safe. It was the behavior of an institution protecting a secret it knew was not. Then he did the other thing, the thing he did not put in reports, which was to go down to the records level after the clerks had gone and pull the standing file on unexplained deaths. The records level of the Ministry of Magic was built to discourage curiosity. It was cold in a way the warming charms never quite reached, and the shelves ran back farther than the lamplight, and the index would give you exactly what you asked for and nothing adjacent, so that a man who did not already know the name of the thing he sought could search for a lifetime and find only his own ignorance neatly filed. Harry knew this. He had learned to ask the index sideways. He asked it for deaths with no magical cause and no muggle cause in the last 5 years, and it gave him 14. He asked it to sort by county, and it obeyed. He asked it quietly whether any of the 14 scenes had been attended by an unspeakable, and the index went still in his hands, the pages ceasing their soft self-turning, the way a servant goes still when a guest asks after the master's business. He had his answer in the stillness. He asked it plainly anyway out of stubbornness, and the file gave him a single card, and on the card was a single line, and the line read, "Records pertaining to this query are held under interdict. Consult the Department of Mysteries." He had worked in this building for 5 years, and he had never seen that word on a card, held under interdict. Not sealed, not classified, not restricted. Interdict was an old word, a churchman's word, the word for a thing forbidden not because it was dangerous, but because it was not to be. He turned the card over, the back was blank, and then as he watched, it was not blank. A line of faint script surfaced through the pasteboard the way a bruise surfaces through skin, and it said, "Auror Potter, you have made this query, it has been noted." And then the script sank again, and the card was only a card. He stood in the cold under the dark shelves and understood with the flat clarity that had replaced most of his other feelings that he had been seen, not caught, seen. There was a difference, and the difference was the whole of his profession. He put the card back. He did not put the query out of his mind. He went home to Grimmauld Place because it was his and because it was the only house in London where the walls did not report to anyone. Number 12 had improved in 5 years the way a prisoner improves when the sentence turns out to be life. It had stopped resisting and started, grudgingly, to keep him. The portrait of Walburga Black no longer screamed because Harry had found the trick of her frame at last, not the curtains and not the charms the others had tried, but a single word in the Black family tongue that closed her mouth as a key closes a lock. Creature had died the winter before, quietly in the cupboard he preferred to any bed, and Harry had buried him among the elf heads on the stair and felt the loss more than he had expected, because Creature at the end had been the only creature in the house who told him the truth about the house. The Black Library was 3 floors up and behind a door that did not exist until you wanted it badly enough. Harry wanted it that night. The shelves here were not the ministry's shelves, they did not withhold. They lied sometimes in the way of books written by proud and guarded people, but they did not pretend that whole territories of the world simply were not. He was looking for the knot, 3 loops crossing 3 closed by a 4th. He did not find it in the books on wards or the books on curse breaking or the 7 fat volumes on the dark defensive arts that the Blacks had loved because the Blacks had always been more haunted than cruel, whatever the world believed. He found it at last in a book that was not about magic at all. It was a genealogy, a Black genealogy, the endless self-congratulating chart of a family in love with its own blood, and in the margin beside a name 3 centuries old someone had drawn the knot in faded ink and written under it, in a cramped hand, a single word he did not know. The name in the chart was Lycoris Black, died 1698, no issue struck through. Beside her, married into the family, and then at some later date scratched out so thoroughly that the parchment had worn thin, was a second name. Peverell was a name that made careful people wear holes in paper. The scratching had been done in haste or under pressure. Harry had ruined enough pages of his own to know the difference between a name struck out and a name someone had needed gone, and this was a name someone had needed gone. But paper keeps its secrets badly. He held the page to the lamp and turned it so the light came sideways across the grooves, and the ghost of the ruined name rose out of the abrasion the way a footprint rises out of snow that has half melted and frozen again. The name was Peverell. He sat with that for a while. Everyone who had bothered to look knew the Potters carried Peverell blood. He had learned it himself in the worst possible way, in a forest, with a stone in his fist and 3 dead people walking beside him who could not stay. What he had not known was that the Blacks had married a Peverell in 1698, and then unmarried her so violently that they had worn a hole in their own history to be rid of the fact. Under the ruined name, in the same cramped, fearful hand that had drawn the knot, was the unknown word. He copied it onto a scrap and looked at it and could not make it resolve into any language he knew. It had too many closed vowels. It looked less like a word than like a knot rendered in letters, a thing meant to be spoken rather than read, a shape the mouth made rather than the eye. He did not say it aloud. Something in him, the part that had kept him alive through a war, told him not to say it aloud in a house at night while he was tired, and he had learned to obey that part even when he did not respect its reasons. The Department of Mysteries did not have a public entrance, which was the point of it. It had instead a lift that would not stop at its level unless the person in the lift had business there, and business was a thing the department decided, not you. Harry had business 4 times in his career, and each time he had left with the sensation of having been led in the way a man is led into a room so that the people in it can see what he does. He had no business there now. He went anyway, and the lift stopped, which told him more than the department would have liked. The corridor was the same as he remembered, black stone and blue flame, doors without handles, the sense of a great machine breathing somewhere below the floor. He did not go toward the room of prophecy or the room of the veil, the 2 rooms a man remembers whether he wants to or not. He went toward the records because his query had been sent here, and because the fastest way to learn what an institution is hiding is to walk toward it and watch who stops you. Someone stopped him. The man was old in the way that instruments are old, precise rather than frail, and he stood in the middle of the corridor as though he had been standing there since before Harry pressed the button in the lift. He wore the plain robes of the department, no color, no insignia, and he held nothing in his hands, which Harry noticed because a man who holds nothing in a place like this is either helpless or so far past needing a wand that the wand is a courtesy he is dispensed with. Auror Potter, the man said. Croaker, we have not been introduced, though of course I know you. Everyone knows you. It is your particular burden. I put in a query, Harry said. It came here. It did. Queries do when they touch the interdict. You are wondering what the interdict is. Croaker's eyes were pale and entirely still, the eyes of a man who has spent decades looking at things that look back. I will tell you because you are not a fool, and it is more dangerous to leave a clever man ignorant than to tell him a little. There are branches of magic that this ministry does not regulate, not because it cannot, because it has decided that the world is better if they do not exist, and a thing that must not exist cannot be regulated, only forgot. We are the Office of Forgetting, that is all the Department of Mysteries has ever been. A man died in Croydon, Harry said. There was a knot drawn in salt on his windowsill, no signature, no trace. 14 deaths in 5 years like it, and all 14 files come here and stop. Something moved behind Croaker's stillness, not alarm, closer to the interest a surgeon takes in a patient who has correctly described his own symptoms. You are a good investigator, he said. You were wasted on the war and you have been wasted since. I mean that as a compliment and a warning because good investigators are the ones who die of curiosity. The knot is nothing. The men who die that way die of their own foolishness, meddling in an art they do not understand, and we clean up after them because the alternative is to explain the art to the public, and the art is precisely the thing we exist to keep the public from imagining is possible. What art? There is no name I can give you, Croaker said. That would not be the first step down a road I am asking you not to walk, so I will not give it to you. I will give you instead a fact, Auror Potter, and you may do with it what your judgment allows. The Ministry of Magic did not begin as a government, it began as a truce. It began as the survivors of a catastrophe agreeing at terrible cost on a list of things that would never be permitted again, and then building an entire civilization on top of the list so that no one would ever have to remember what was under it. You have lived your whole life inside that agreement and thought it was the sky. Most people do. It is a mercy. I am offering you the mercy of not knowing. Take it. What was the catastrophe? For the length of 2 heartbeats Croaker said nothing, and the blue flames in their brackets stood without flickering, and the great machine breathing under the floor seemed to hold its breath with him. There were men once, Croaker said, who did not need a wand or a ministry or a name they were born with, and who could not be found or bound or brought before any court because they had made themselves into something the world had no procedure for. When two such men disagreed, the disagreement did not stay small. It is not written down. We made certain it is not written down. But the land remembers it, Auror Potter, and the land does not forgive, and the whole purpose of this department, the whole purpose of the government you serve and the treaty you mistake for the sky is to see that the land is never given a second reason to remember. You want a name for the art. The art has no name that we permit, but the age it made has a name. We call it the sundering, and we do not call it that aloud. And a knot in some salt in Croydon, Harry said, frightens you enough to send the head of the Auror office to my desk and to walk down here yourself to a man who put in one query. That's a great deal of machinery for superstition. It is a great deal of machinery, Croaker agreed, for a door that is held for 300 years and has begun very recently to be knocked on from the far side. You are not the first to knock this year. You are merely the first who might be answered. He let that stand a moment. Now I have told you more than I have told anyone in a decade, which is a calculated risk, and the calculation was that fear is a better teacher than ignorance for a man of your particular history. Prove me right, take the mercy. Harry looked at him and understood two things at once, cleanly, with the same flat certainty that had told him the wand was wrong about the room. The first was that Croaker was not lying. The second was that Croaker was not telling the truth either. He was performing sincerity the way Harry performed clean reports, and the performance was so good precisely because so much of it was true. Thank you, Harry said, for the warning, but you will not take the mercy. I'll consider it. No, Croaker said without unkindness. You won't. I have read your file, Auror Potter. You have never once in your life taken a mercy that came at the price of not knowing. It is why you are extraordinary, and it is why in the end we will have this conversation again under worse conditions. I would prefer to be wrong. Go home. He stepped aside, which was itself a message because it meant he had never needed to block the corridor at all. He had only wanted Harry to watch him choose to. And Auror Potter, the name your ancestors carried is a heavier thing than you know. Be careful whose blood you go looking to inherit. Harry went home. He noticed that Croaker had said your ancestors and the name they carried, and that he, Harry, had not mentioned the Peverells or the genealogy or the scratched-out marriage in a book 3 floors above a street in London where no unspeakable had any right to have looked. He had been seen. He had been seen very thoroughly and for a very long time, and the seeing had started before he had the sense to know he was being watched. He did not sleep. He sat in the library with the genealogy open and the scrap of copied word beside it and a bottle of the Black's brandy that was older than the marriage in the chart, and he did the thing he was best at, which was to sit very still and let a problem arrange itself. The problem arranged itself like this. There was an art the ministry did not regulate because it had decided the art must not exist. The art left no signature, which meant the ministry's entire apparatus of detection, the trace, the wand registry, the residue charms every Auror carried, the great humming machinery that made the wizarding world governable, was blind to it. A civilization had been built to be a sky over a list of forbidden things, and the list was old enough that the men enforcing it no longer had to understand it, only guard the door. Croaker guarded the door. Croaker had come to the corridor personally, an old and dangerous man wasting an evening on a single Auror, which told Harry the door was more important than the department wished anyone to think. He turned the evening over and looked at it from the side as he had looked at the room in Croydon. 3 things had happened that a careless man would have called coincidence and a careful man would call intelligence. Robards had come to his desk knowing about the salt. The records index had written a line back to him inside a minute of his query. Croaker had met him in the corridor before the lift had any right to stop. Take the 3 together and a picture assembled that Harry did not enjoy but could not unsee. The ministry did not merely guard the buried art, it watched actively in real time for the precise pattern of a mind beginning to notice it, and the moment his mind had produced that pattern the whole apparatus had turned toward him with a speed no ordinary case ever provoked. They were not slow, they were not complacent. Croaker had all but admitted the door was being knocked on from the far side and that Harry was the first knock that might be answered, which meant the Office of Forgetting had spent 3 centuries perfecting exactly one skill, the early detection of curiosity, and had just spent that skill on him. A lesser adversary would have reassured him. This one had shown him its competence on purpose because competence shown is a kind of wall. He respected the wall. He also noted that a wall shown to you is a wall that cannot be shown to you twice, and Harry's own blood was somehow inside the room behind the door. Croaker had said so in the last thing he said, which was the only thing in the whole conversation he had not planned to say, or had planned to say and pretended not to. Be careful whose blood you go looking to inherit. Harry had inherited a great deal, a house, a vault of galleons he had never needed. A cloak that did not die and did not fail and had passed down through the potters from a man in a story who had walked away from death, and which the ministry had held for a night once, without ever explaining why or how they had known to want it. A stone he had let fall in a forest and never gone back for because some inheritances you refuse. A ring the stone had come in, a ring the blacks would have scratched out of their history if they had ever owned it, because it was a Peverell thing, because Peverell was a name that made frightened people wear holes in paper. He set the copied word on the table between the lamp and the bottle. He was not a reckless man. He wanted that understood, if only by himself. He had been reckless once as a child, and the recklessness had killed people he loved. And he had spent 5 years grinding it out of himself in an office that rewarded caution and punished imagination. Until he was a man who read a room without casting and wrote a lie without flinching and did not say strange words aloud in a dark house because a part of him he did not respect told him not to. But there is a difference between recklessness and choice, and he had reached the age where he was tired of letting other people make his choices and call it his safety. Croker had offered him the mercy of not knowing. Harry had spent his whole childhood being handed that particular mercy by people who loved him, and people who used him and people who could not tell the difference. And every single time the not knowing had been a leash, and every single time the leash had been fastened for his own good, and every single time it had turned out that his own good was a story other people told to keep him where they wanted him. He had been raised in a cupboard by people who told him nothing was wrong. He had gone to a school that let a monster into its halls and told the children not to worry. He had been the centerpiece of a war whose managers had known, from the start, roughly when and how he would be asked to die, and had let him grow up believing he was choosing his own path so that the choosing would look like his own. He was done being kept. He picked up the scrap of parchment and held it to the lamp and looked at the word that was not a word, the not rendered in letters, the shape the mouth made rather than the eye. And he did the thing his cautious part told him not to do deliberately with his eyes open, understanding that it was a door and that doors once opened are difficult to convince to shut. He said it aloud. The sound of it was wrong in his own mouth, too many closed vowels, a syllable that pushed against the back of his teeth and wanted to stay there. It did not echo. Sounds in that house always echoed, the high rooms and the stone throwing every noise back doubled, but this one went out of him and did not come back, absorbed, taken the way rain is taken by ground that has been dry too long. The lamp did not gutter. The brandy did not stir. Nothing in the room moved at all, and that was how he knew something had happened, because a room in Grimmauld Place was never truly still. There was always the settling of old wood and the whisper of the portraits pretending to sleep, and the faint industrial hum of the wards the order had layered over the house until it wore them like plate armor. All of it stopped. For the length of one held breath, the house was as inert as the room in Croydon had claimed to be, scrubbed of magic, silent, and into that silence, from somewhere that was not the room and not his own head and not any direction a compass would name, something turned toward him. He felt it the way you feel a large animal wake in the dark on the other side of a wall. Not hostile, not kind, attentive. Ancient in a manner that made the word ancient feel like a child's approximation. A great slow attention swinging around to fix on the point in the world where a man had, for the first time in 300 years, spoken one of its names correctly and meant it. And then under the floor, under the foundation, under the London clay and the buried rivers and the older stone beneath the rivers, something answered. Not a sound, a pressure. A single deep pulse like the beat of a heart too large to hear, that came up through the soles of his feet and the legs of the chair and the bones of the house and passed through him and was gone and left behind it in his chest. A warmth that was not the brandy and answered to no name he owned, only the sense, absolute and unarguable, that he had been heard. And in the fraction of an instant that the pulse was inside him, before thought could close over it and make it small, he saw. Not with his eyes were on the lamp. He saw the way a man half drowned sees the surface from beneath, all at once and from the wrong side. London opened under him like a lung, and beneath the streets and the sewers and the plague pits and the drowned Roman wharves ran rivers that were not rivers, seams of slow gold light braided down into the dark, converging and dividing and converging again, a vast quiet circulatory system threaded through the body of the land. Older than the city, older than the name of the city, older than names. The seams pulsed. They had been pulsing under the feet of every witch and wizard who had ever hurried across a ministry atrium, believing that magic came out of a wand the way water comes out of a tap, a convenience, a metered thing, a thing you paid for and were granted. He saw that the wand magic he had trusted his life to was a single narrow tap fitted over an ocean, and that the ocean had been there the whole time, patient, enormous, indifferent, waiting under the floor of the world for someone to remember it was not a story. Then the instant closed, the gold went dark. He was a man in a chair with a lamp and a bottle, and his hands were not steady. The wards came back, the wood settled. Walburga's portrait, 3 floors down and gagged by a word in her own family's tongue, made a sound Harry had never heard her make. Not a scream, a whimper, the noise a proud thing makes when something it had been raised to keep out turns over in its sleep nearby. Harry sat very still and let his hands stop shaking, which took longer than he would have chosen, and then he looked at the scrap of parchment, at the ruined name in the chart, at the knot drawn in salt by a dead man in Croydon to keep out precisely the thing that had just answered from under the city. He had wanted to know. He had chosen to know. And the first thing knowing had taught him was that the ministry had not buried this art because it was dangerous the way a curse is dangerous, small and sharp and containable. They had buried it because it was large, because it was under everything. Because a civilization could be built as a sky over the top of it, and still 3 centuries later a single word said correctly in a dark house would reach all the way down and be answered, and no instrument they owned would ever know it had happened. He thought of Croker in the black corridor, guarding a door, wasting an evening on one Auror. He thought of the card that had written itself, "It has been noted." He thought without heat, with the flat clarity that had become the truest thing about him, that the ministry had spent 300 years and the whole weight of its machinery to make certain that no one would ever stand where he was standing now, and that he was standing there anyway, and that they did not yet know it. They would learn. He intended to be very good at this before they did. He closed the genealogy. He did not close the scrap of parchment. He folded it once and put it in the inner pocket of his coat against his chest, where he could feel the fold of it when he moved. Then he put out the lamp and sat in the dark of the house that was finally, after 5 years, keeping him, and listened to the deep things settle back into whatever sleep 300 years of forgetting had laid it in, and made himself a promise in language plain enough that no part of him could later pretend to have misunderstood. He would find out what they had buried. He would learn to use it better than anyone alive. And when they came for him, and they would come, he would already be somewhere they could not reach. In the morning he went to work and filed 3 reports and was, by every measure the ministry knew how to take, an ordinary Auror having an ordinary week. The measures were wrong. They had always, he was beginning to understand, been wrong about the room and the wand and the sky and the list underneath it. And he walked through the great machine of them, smiling at the people who knew his face, and carrying against his chest a folded scrap of parchment with a door written on it. And no one who saw him pass had the smallest idea that the most closely guarded silence in the history of their world had, the night before, turned over in its sleep and learned his name. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the sealed codex. For 9 days after the deep thing learned his name, Harry did nothing. This was the hardest thing he had ever chosen to do, and he understood that it was also the most important. A reckless man, having felt the ocean move under the floor of the world, would have gone back to the chair and the bottle the next night and said the name again and again, hungrier each time, until the ocean noticed the hunger and did to him what it had done to old Mr. Pettibone in Croydon. Harry had watched enough people burn themselves down for one more taste of power to know the shape of that fire from a long way off, so he did nothing. He went to work. He signed off on a stolen cauldron and a hexed neighbor and a wizard in Manchester who had been selling love potions to Muggle men and calling it aftershave. He drank his tea. He let the ministry watch him be ordinary, and he watched the ministry watch, and he learned the size of the thing that had turned toward him by measuring the shadow it cast. The shadow was substantial. There was a witch from improper use of magic who took to eating her lunch at the fountain in the atrium on the days Harry crossed it, and never on the days he did not. There was a raven, an actual raven, that sat on the ledge outside the charmed window of the Auror office and was not repelled by the charms that repelled the pigeons, and its eyes had the wrong stillness. His post came to him already opened and resealed with a competence that was itself the message: "We can read your letters and we want you to know we can." None of it was hostile, all of it was total. The custodians of the buried art, whatever they called themselves, were not going to arrest Harry Potter, war hero, the most photographed man in Britain, for a knot in some salt. They were going to sit on him patiently with the whole weight of a 300-year-old institution, until he grew bored and gave up, the way they had presumably sat on every knock at the door for 3 centuries and outlasted all of them. They did not understand yet that they were not dealing with a knock. That suited Harry. The single most valuable thing he owned, he had decided somewhere in those 9 days, was their belief that they understood him, and he intended to spend it slowly. Ron found him on the 7th evening, in the pub off Diagon they had used since they were 19, and sat down across the scarred table with 2 pints and the careful face of a man who has rehearsed a conversation on the walkover and lost his place in it the moment he arrived. "You've gone quiet," Ron said. "Not office quiet. You've gone quiet the way you went quiet the summer before we went after the Horcruxes. And the last time you had that face you disappeared into a tent for the better part of a year and I had to help you dig graves." He turned his pint without drinking it. "Whatever the Croydon thing turned into, and I'm not thick, I know it turned into something, I want you to remember there are people who'll be at your funeral who'd rather not be. That's all. That's the whole speech. Ginny made me practice it and I've already ruined it." It was a good speech, Harry said, and meant it, and something in his chest turned over at the plainness of the love in it, which was the thing he could least afford right now and least wanted to lose. "You didn't ruin it." "Then say you'll stop." "I'll be careful." "That's not the same sentence, mate." Ron looked at him for a moment with the shrewdness people always underestimated in him because he wore it under so much decency. "It's never once been the same sentence with you." "All right, I said the thing. If it goes bad, you come to me first, before the ministry, before anyone. Promise me that much and I'll leave you your quiet." "I promise," Harry said, and this was the one true promise he made that week, and he kept it later at a cost neither of them could have guessed, sitting in a warm pub with the froth going flat. On the 10th day he went to see Hermione. She had an office now, a real one, with her name on the door in gold leaf: Deputy Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, H.J. Granger, and a window that looked out on a charmed square of the same weather Harry's fake window showed, so that the two of them, 3 floors apart, watched the same false rain. She had earned every inch of the office, and it had cost her something to earn, and Harry could see the cost in how she kept her quill lined up exactly parallel to the edge of her blotter, a daily war against a chaos she no longer had the war to burn it off on. "You look terrible," she said, which from Hermione was a form of love. "Sit. I have 11 minutes before the Wisengamot subcommittee, and you have the face you had in fourth year when you'd worked out something you weren't supposed to know." "I need the law," Harry said, "not the current law, the founding law, the statutes from the settlement, the ones from before the statute of secrecy when the ministry was being put together." Hermione's quill did not move, but her attention sharpened onto him like a lens-finding focus. "The conquered statutes, why, there's an interdict, an old one. A whole category of magic that the founding settlement outlawed and then buried so thoroughly that a query about it in records writes you a warning back inside a minute. I want to see the actual instrument, the words they used, what they thought they were forbidding in their own language before 300 years of people not writing it down." She was quiet for a moment. The false rain ran down the false glass. "There's a hole," she said finally, slowly, a woman deciding how much of a thing she had noticed to admit she had noticed. "In the founding record, I found it my second year in this department, and I told myself it was a filing error because the alternative was insane and I had promotions to earn. The Concord of 1692 has 41 articles. They're all there, catalogued, cross-referenced, taught to every trainee, except the numbering runs 1 to 41 and there are only 40 articles. Article 9 isn't missing, it was never entered. There's a name for it in the marginalia of the other articles. They refer back to it, Article 9 per the interdict, subject to the interdict, but Article 9 itself is not in the record and has never been in the record and cannot be requested because to request a document you have to prove it exists, and the only proof that it exists is a set of references to a thing that officially does not." "That's it," Harry said. "That's the one." "What's it about?" "I don't know. That's the point, Harry. Nobody in the building knows. It's not that it's secret, it's that it's been engineered so that knowing is structurally impossible." She was quiet, and then the researcher in her, the girl who had never in her life been able to leave a locked door unpicked, got the better of the deputy who had learned which doors to walk past. "Though there's one place the shape of it shows, Article 40, the last of them. It's the article that establishes the Department of Mysteries, and it's a page and a half of dull administrative Latin, except for one clause at the very bottom that everybody reads past because it sounds like more of the same. It provides for a standing office, and it binds that office by oath, and it calls the members of that office custodes interdicti, and it gives them a single duty: not to investigate, not to prosecute, to keep shut. Those two words, Harry, in a founding constitutional document, custoder clausum, to keep the closed thing closed. There is a chamber somewhere in this ministry whose entire constitutional purpose is to stay sealed, and there is an office of men sworn from the founding of the government to spend their lives keeping it that way, and they are the only body in the whole apparatus that answers to no minister, no Wisengamot, no election, because Article 40 exempts them in Latin at the bottom of a boring page from the government they helped to build. I have read that clause a dozen times and told myself it was a historical curiosity. It is not a curiosity. It is a knife the founders left inside the Constitution, pointed at exactly one thing, and I think you have just told me what the thing is." "Keepers of the closed door," Harry said, translating it slowly, tasting it. "Custodians of the interdict. That's the phrase, word for word." Her attention sharpened again, and something moved behind it that was closer to fear than to curiosity, the first crack Harry had seen in the deputy's polish. "And you already knew there was a door before you walked in here, which means you're further along than you're telling me, which means whatever I pull from the marginalia is confirmation for you, not discovery. Harry, who came to warn you off? Because someone did. You have the look of a man who's already been threatened by something patient." "An old man in a black corridor," Harry said, "who wanted me to know exactly how completely I was already surrounded." He did not name Croaker, and Hermione, to her enormous credit, did not press, because she had spent enough years beside him to know the difference between a secret he was keeping to protect himself and one he was keeping to protect her, and this was the second kind. She went to her window and spoke to the false rain rather than to him, which was how he knew she had decided to help him and had not yet forgiven herself for it. "Once, about a year ago, I asked Croaker, at a function. I'd had 2 glasses of wine, and I asked him, half joking, what happened to Article 9. And he looked at me the way a schoolmaster looks at a clever child who's found the one question on the exam that isn't allowed to have an answer, and he said, 'Miss Granger, some doors are load-bearing.' And then he asked after Ron and moved on, and I have thought about that sentence at 3 in the morning more often than I would like. 'Some doors are load-bearing.'" Harry turned the phrase over. It matched the other one, the office of forgetting, the whole purpose of the government you serve. Croaker was consistent, which meant Croaker believed what he said, which made him more dangerous than a liar and more predictable. "He means the whole building falls if the door opens." "He means the whole world does," Hermione said. "Or he believes it does, which for a man in his position is the same thing." She turned back to Harry, and her face had the particular set it got when her loyalty to the truth and her loyalty to the institutions she had bled to join were at war, and the truth was winning by inches and hated itself for it. "I can get you the marginalia, every reference to Article 9 in the surviving 40. It won't tell you what the interdict forbids, but a shape shows up in a photograph even when the thing that casts the shadow is out of frame. You can read the shape." "Hermione." He waited until she looked at him. "If you pull those references, it will be logged. They'll know it was you." I'm the deputy head of magical law enforcement, she said, and for a moment there was iron in it, the old Gryffindor iron that no amount of ministerial polish had ever quite smothered. I'm allowed to be curious about the law, let them log it. Then, quieter, the iron sheathing itself. Don't make me regret this by being reckless, I know that face. I've followed that face into a great many burning buildings. Just this once be the version of you that plans. I'm planning, Harry said. That's the only reason I'm still ordinary. Orm was waiting for him in the library at Grimmauld Place that night in the chair Harry usually sat in, with the genealogy open on his knee and the bottle of black brandy already breathing in 2 glasses. Harry had his wand out before the door finished opening, which the old man watched with the mild approval of a fencing master noting a student's guard, and did not react to at all, which told Harry the wand was decoration in this room and both of them knew it. "Sit down, Mr. Potter," said Orm. "If I had come to kill you, you would not have opened the door. You would simply have stopped being anywhere. Put the stick away, it embarrasses us both." He was old past any easy guess at his age, older than Croaker, old in a manner that had stopped mattering somewhere back down the years and become simply a texture like weathering on stone. He was small and spare and dressed in the plain dark clothes of a man who did not want to be looked at, and his hands, folded on the genealogy, were the only young thing about him, long and unmarked and terribly still. His eyes, when they came up, were the color of the gold Harry had seen braided under the city, and Harry understood before a word of introduction that he was looking at the second half of the answer he had begun to assemble in the chair the old man was now sitting in. "You felt it," Harry said, "when I said the name." "Everyone who can feel anything felt it," Orm said. "You spoke a true name aloud, correctly, meaning it, in the city where they buried the Codex for the first time in 106 years. It was, from where I sit, roughly comparable to a man striking a match in a dark room where the rest of us have spent our whole lives training ourselves not to remember that light exists. Sit, drink. We have very little time and a great deal to undo, and the first thing to undo is your idea that any of this is safe, because it is not, and I am not, and neither, most of all, are you." Harry sat. He did not drink. Orm noted that too, and this time the approval reached his mouth without troubling to become a smile. "Good," the old man said. "You don't take what a stranger pours. Then let me pour you something you can't refuse, which is the truth, because you've earned enough of it to be dangerous with a little more. My name, the one my mother gave me, is Cashin Orm. I am the last living warden of the root. There were 9 of us when I was young. There's one of me now, and I have spent the better part of a century learning to be one man the entire Ministry of Magic cannot find, which is the only master's degree the buried art still offers. You want to know what they buried? I am the only person alive who can teach you, and you are the only person alive I have found in a lifetime of looking who could learn it before it kills you. That is not flattery, it is your blood. Do you understand what you are?" "A Peverell," Harry said. "A Peverell," Orm agreed, and set his long young hand flat on the open genealogy on the scratched-out name Harry had raised out of the abrasion with the lamp. "The Peverells were not a family, they were a discipline. Long before your ministry, long before Hogwarts, when the craft you call magic was still one undivided thing and had not yet been cut down to the size of a wand, there were houses that kept the deep work, that carried in their blood the memory of how to speak to the root and be answered without being consumed. The Peverells were the greatest of them. The ministry did not hunt them because they were dark. The ministry hunted them because they were the living proof that the whole treaty was a leash fitted over a power that did not need it, and a leash cannot be sold to the flock if the flock can see the animals it was never fitted to. So the great houses were broken, scattered, married into families who scratched their names out of the record. Diluted down the generations until the blood forgot itself and became, at the very end of the line, a decent, angry orphan boy with a wand and no idea that the reason spells always came easier to him than they should have was that he was the last full inheritance of a discipline the world had spent 3 centuries erasing. He lifted his hand from the page. "You are not a wizard who found a forbidden book, Mr. Potter. You are the thing the forbidden book was written to warn people about. There is a difference, and the difference is the only reason you are still alive to be spoken to. Croaker told me there was a catastrophe," Harry said. "The sundering," he said it the way a man says a word he's afraid of. "He should be afraid of it, so should you." Orm drank, unhurried, and the firelight moved on the gold of his eyes. "I am going to tell you the true history now, and you are going to dislike it, because it will not let you be the hero and it will not let them be the villains, and you have spent your whole life inside a story with clean edges. There are no clean edges here. The root is not good, it is not evil, it is not for you, and it is not against you. It is the sea, and the sea drowns the wicked and the innocent with exactly the same indifference. And once, 400 years ago, before the conquered, before the leash, there were perhaps 200 men and women in these islands who could stand in that sea and make it do their bidding, and they did not answer to anyone, and for a while it was glorious. Cities that flew. Winters turned aside from a starving valley by a woman speaking to the wind. Plagues unmade in a night. And then 2 of them wanted the same stretch of coast, and neither would bend, and they did to each other and to everyone between them what men will always eventually do with power that answers to nothing, and the killing did not stay killing, because when a warden dies drawing his whole strength, the strength does not die with him. It goes back into the root wrong, curdled. And after enough of them died that way in enough anger, the land itself began to sicken, and the veil between this world and the one under it began to thin, and things came through that I will not describe to you at 3 in the morning in a marsh. That was the sundering. It nearly ended everything. And the men who stopped it, the founders of your ministry, were not cowards and were not tyrants. They were survivors who had seen the world nearly torn open and who made a hard, cold, defensible choice that no one ever again would be permitted to hold that much in answer to no one. They buried the Codex. They hunted my forebears, and in the strict, narrow, blood-soaked accounting of it, Mr. Potter, they were not wrong. Harry sat with that. You're defending them. I am refusing to lie to you about them, which is a different and more useful thing. They were right about the danger, and they lied about everything else. They told the world the root was dark when it is no more dark than the tide. They told the world it never existed and taught children to laugh at the memory of it, and they built a comfortable little metered civilization on top of the grave and called the grave the floor of the world. And they have spent 3 centuries guarding that grave, not because they still fear the sundering. Most of them have never heard the word, but because the lie is now load-bearing, and a ministry that admitted the root was real would have to admit that everything it grants you, your wand, your trace, your licenses, your permitted magic, is a ration, and no one who's being rationed forgives the hand that rations them once they learn there was an ocean all along. That is the secret they will kill to keep, not the sundering. Rationing, he set down his glass. So now you know why they buried it and why it was worth burying and why keeping it buried is a crime all the same. Both things are true. If you cannot hold both of them in your head at once without flinching, then you cannot hold the root either, and you should walk out that wall and go be an Auror and let me die the last of my kind in peace. I can hold both, Harry said. We'll see, said Orm. That is the only thing I have ever learned that is always true. We'll see. Harry looked into the peat fire and turned the 2 truths over, the buried danger and the buried crime, and found that they did not fight each other in him the way the old man seemed to expect. He had spent his whole life inside exactly this shape of thing, a monstrous act done by people who believed themselves good for reasons that were real at a cost paid by someone who never got a vote. The Dursleys had locked a child in a cupboard and told themselves it was discipline. The wizarding world had raised him to die and told itself it was destiny. He had learned young that the most dangerous people are not the ones who do evil while knowing it, but the ones who do it while certain they are doing right, because they never stop, they never doubt, they sleep. Croaker slept. That was the whole of what Orm was warning him against becoming, and the warning landed, because Harry had met the type from the inside of their kindness his entire life, and he had promised himself, somewhere back in the cupboard, that if he ever held real power he would at least do himself the courtesy of knowing exactly what it cost and never pretending the cost away. He could hold both truths. He had been holding both truths since he was 11 years old. The only thing that had changed was that now one of them was his. The refuge was not a place. That was the first lesson, and Orm taught it by taking him there. They did not apparate. Orm did not take his arm, produce a portkey, or draw so much as a rune in the air. He simply asked Harry to hold in his mind the word he had spoken in the chair, the true name, the not rendered in sound, and to walk beside him toward the library wall. And Harry, against every instinct a life of caution had built in him, did, and the wall was not there, and then the London night was not there. And then they were standing on a low rise in a country of black water and gray reeds under a sky the color of a healing bruise, with wind that smelled of salt and rot and cold green growing things, and Harry's stomach lurched at the wrongness of having moved through no distance at all. The fens, Orm said, unbothered, already walking. One of the old notes, the land here has never fully belonged to anyone, which is why the root runs close to the surface and the ministry's maps develop a headache and quietly leave it blank. My cottage is not on any of those maps. It is not in the sense your instruments would insist upon, precisely anywhere. It is warded in the old way, which is not a wall you throw up around a place but a persuasion you work upon the land itself so that the land declines to have you found. Come, mind the water. It is deeper than 300 years and it remembers every man who ever drowned in it, and on the wrong night it will offer to introduce you. The cottage sat on a hummock ringed by standing stones so worn they might have been mistaken for sheep. Inside it was one low room, a peat fire, a wall of books that were not printed but written, hundreds of them, the hand-bound black-hide volumes Harry had seen one of on a dead man's kitchen table. He understood, looking at that wall, that he was seeing the thing the ministry had spent 3 centuries trying to burn out of the world, gathered in one room in a marsh, guarded by an old man and a persuasion worked upon the mud. The sealed codex, Orm said, following his look, is not here, don't get ideas. What is here is the marginalia, the working notes, the survivals, everything the 9 of us managed to carry out of the fire and copy and recopy against the day. The codex itself, the master lore, the whole undivided grammar of the root they took. In 1692 they took it into the Department of Mysteries and they built a chamber to hold it that has no door because a door can be opened, and they filled the chamber with the only thing in the world that can reliably keep a warden out, which is the sworn, bound, self-renewing will of a line of men who have given their lives to keeping it shut, the custodians of the interdict. You have met their keeper, Croaker. Croaker is the current one. There is always a current one. When Croaker dies, another will take up the binding and the chamber will stay shut, and the codex will go on being the most complete account of the deep work that has existed since the sundering, sealed in the one building in Britain where a warden cannot walk without being unmade at the door. Orm lowered himself onto a stool by the fire and gestured Harry to the other. You want it, of course you want it. I have watched the want arrive in your face all evening, and I have let it because you will need it, and because a man who lies to himself about wanting power is 100 times more dangerous than a man who admits it and then governs it. So admit it, And then learn before we go one step further why wanting is not the same as taking and why every warden but one is dead. The first lesson in the deep work was not a spell, it was a way of standing. Orm took him out past the stones to a place where the ground gave slightly underfoot, spongy with old water, and told him to take off his boots, which Harry did, and to put away his wand, which Harry did more slowly, and to stand and breathe and stop. You have spent your life, Orm said, casting magic the way a man throws a stone. You gather your will, you shape it in a wand, you fling it out of yourself at the world, and the world changes, and you are a little emptier for the throwing, and you call this magic. It is not magic, it is a trick played with a tool. Real work does not come out of you, it comes through you. The root is under your feet in the water, in the black earth, in the veins of light you saw open under London. It is not yours, it will never be yours. But you are of the houses that could be trusted to be a place it passes through without shattering. And tonight you are going to let it pass through you, a very little for the first time, and you are going to survive it because I am standing here to make sure the very little does not become a great deal. Now, feel where it runs, do not reach. Wardens who reach die reaching. Simply notice that your foot is on a vein and that the vein is warm and be for one moment the kind of thing warmth is willing to move toward. Harry stood in the cold mud in the dark of the fen and did the least active thing he had done in years, which was to want nothing and reach for nothing and simply notice, and the noticing changed the world. It began in the soles of his feet, the warmth he had felt come up through the chair in Grimmauld Place, but slower now, and answering, threading up through the arches of his bare feet and the bones of his ankles and into him, a current with no source and no direction that he could nonetheless feel choosing him, moving into him because he had stopped being a wall and become, for one held moment, a channel. It did not feel like the wand. The wand had always been a muscle he clenched. This was a tide he permitted. It came up his legs and pooled behind his sternum where the single deep pulse had struck him 9 nights ago. And it was gold, actually gold. He could see it now behind his open eyes, the light he had glimpsed under the city running up through his own body. And with it came the enormous quiet attention of the thing under the world, no longer swinging toward him from a great distance but here close, folded around the little standing figure of him in the mud with a tenderness that had teeth in it. That could unmake him as easily as hold him, that held him only because an old man's words stood between the tide and the drowning. Now, Orm said very softly from very close, the reeds beside your right hand, do not command them, you are not their master and the root does not answer masters. Name them what they are in the true speech and ask the root to remember that they can bend and then simply want them bent the way you want your own hand to close. Harry looked at the reeds, black against the bruised sky, and the true name of them rose in him without being learned, offered up out of the tide itself. A sound with no vowels a human throat was built for, and he did not speak it so much as let it be spoken through the channel he had become, and he wanted the reeds bent, gently, wanted it the way a man wants his own hand to close. The reeds bent. All of them in a slow silver ripple that ran outward from his right hand across the whole black expanse of the marsh to the edge of sight. A wave of bowing grass a mile wide moving in a wind that was not blowing, and the standing stones hummed on their hummock, and the black water lifted in a long smooth swell and lay down again. And somewhere far off 100 sleeping birds came off the reeds at once in a rush of wings because the world had for the space of one breath done as Harry Potter asked it. Without a wand, without a word any ministry instrument could hear, without leaving on the night so much as the ghost of a signature. For that one breath he was not a man standing in a marsh. He was a place the marsh happened through, a lens the whole cold sweep of the fen had chosen to focus itself into. And every drop of standing water and every stem of frost-stiffened reed out to the black horizon was for that instant an extension of his own attention, so that when the reeds bowed it did not feel like moving them. It felt like the fractional, godlike ease of noticing that a part of himself the size of a county had decided to lie down. The scale of it did not frighten him. That was the thing he would remember afterward, turning it over in the ruins of his exhaustion. It did not frighten him at all, it fit. Then Orm said a word of his own, low and final, and the tide withdrew, drawing back down out of Harry's chest and his legs and out through the soles of his feet into the mud. And Harry stood swaying in the sudden ordinary cold with his heart going hard and his knees water and the whole marsh settling back into stillness around him, and he understood in the emptied-out aftermath why they died. Because it felt like that. Because after that, the metered trickle of a wand would taste of drinking from a puddle when you have stood in the sea, and a man who had felt the sea would go back and reach. Because reaching was the only way to get more of it faster, and the sea did not care, the sea was glad to come. The sea would come and come until there was no channel left for it to come through, only a burned place in the shape of a person who had wanted more than his blood could carry. That, Orm said, was less than a warden's child does before it can walk, and it has already half killed you because you did it with a man's greed instead of a child's ease. You felt it, the pull the next time. Say it, I want to hear you say it out loud so that you and I both know you know. I want to do it again, Harry said. His voice was not steady. Now more. Yes, Orm said. And that want is the thing that will kill you, and the whole of what I have to teach you, the entire content of the discipline, everything the Codex holds and the ministry buried and 9 wardens died carrying out of the fire, comes down in the end to a single question you will have to answer every hour for the rest of your life. Not can you take more, you can. The root has no bottom and it will pour into you until you rupture and be delighted the whole time. The question is whether you can want more and not take it, whether you can stand in the sea and drink by the cup. Every warden but me answered that question wrong once on one bad night, and the fens are full of them. I answered it right for 90 years by being a coward who never took enough to matter. His gold eyes held Harry's in the firelight leaking from the cottage door. You are not going to be a coward, I can see that already. So you had better become something rarer, and you had better become it faster than any student I have ever had, because the custodians felt your reeds bend tonight the way I did, and they are not coming to teach you. They came back through no distance to the library at Grimmauld Place a little after 3 in the morning, and Harry knew the moment they arrived that something had changed in the house while he was standing in the mud 100 miles and no miles away. The wards were awake. Not breached awake, the whole layered armor the Order had built over the house, standing at attention the way a dog stands when it has heard a sound below the range a man can hear. And on the desk where Harry had left nothing sat a single sheet of ministry parchment, folded once, and across the fold in a hand he knew was written Auror Potter. Orm looked at it and did not touch it. They can't come in, he said. Not here, not yet. The house is old and stubborn, and it has a Peverell in it now, which makes it more stubborn. But they can knock, read it, then decide what kind of man you are going to be about it, because the reading is the last moment you get to still be the other kind. Harry unfolded it. It was from Robards in Robards' own hand, which was itself a message because the head of the Auror office did not write his own notes. Harry had said, "Come in tomorrow, 9 o'clock, my office, not the floor. There are people who want to meet you, and I could not talk them out of it. I tried. Whatever you have been doing these last 10 days, and I am not asking, stop it tonight, because tomorrow I am going to be asked to help them make you stop it, and I would rather ask you first, as the man who pulled you out of the rubble and made you into something other than a name on a memorial. Come in, let me help you. There is still a version of this where you grow old signing off on natural causes, and I am begging you as your friend to choose it while it is still on the table." Harry read it twice. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at the awake wards in the awake house and the old man by the door who had shown him the sea and told him not to drown in it. "He means it," Harry said. "Every word, he's not lying to me." "No," Orm agreed. "The good ones never are, that is what makes them useful. They believe they are saving you, right up until the moment they hand you to the men who are not saving you at all, and they go home believing it, and they sleep. His grief will be real. It will also be too late to be worth anything. That is what an institution is, Mr. Potter. It is a machine for turning good men's real grief into your cage and charging them nothing for it and letting them feel noble on the way home." He drew his plain dark coat around himself and became again a man no one would look at twice. "So, 9 o'clock, you have until then to decide whether you are a knock at the door or something the door was built to keep out. I would not presume to tell you which. I will only tell you that they have already decided for you, and that the one advantage you own, the single coin in your pocket, is that they still think you are deciding." Harry looked at the note a moment longer, and the plan assembled itself the way the picture of the dead man's last night had assembled itself in Croydon, unbidden, complete. He would go. 9 o'clock, Robards' office. The ordinary man walking into the room the ordinary man had been summoned to, contrite, tired, a little frightened, willing to be talked down. He would let them see the thing they expected to see, because a man who arrives resisting teaches his captors nothing, and a man who arrives apparently broken teaches them everything: their faces, their names, the shape of their fear, how many of them there were and which of them mattered and which of them were only furniture. The meeting was a trap. It was also, if he walked into it as the right kind of man, the only free look he would ever get inside the machine that was closing on him. You did not spring a trap by refusing to step in it. You sprang it by stepping in it, having already decided you were the more dangerous thing in the room, and then keeping that to yourself. "I'll go to the meeting," Harry said. "Of course you will," said Orm. "So would I. Learn everyone in the room, say nothing they can use, and whatever they offer you, and they will offer you something, take a night to think it over, because a night is all I need." He walked toward the wall, and the wall began obligingly to not be there. "Orm," Harry said. The old man paused, half into the dark of the fens that lived on the other side of a library in Islington. "Teach me faster," Harry said. For the first time all night the gold eyes warmed all the way through, and the thing that came into the old man's face was not approval and was not pity, but something between them, the look of a man watching a door he had waited by for 90 years finally, quietly begin to open. "Yes," Cashin Orm said. "I rather thought you'd say that." Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The first binding the room they had chosen for him was not Robards' office. Harry understood the choice the moment the lift let him out on a level his badge should not have opened, into a corridor he had never walked, and found Robards waiting at the far end with the particular stillness of a man standing guard over his own regret. The head of the Auror office did not meet junior colleagues on floors that did not officially exist. He met them on the record in daylight with a witness. This was none of those things, and the difference was itself the message, the same grammar of intimidation Harry had been reading for 11 days now. "We can hold this meeting anywhere, on any floor, off every record, and no one will ever be able to prove it happened." "They're inside," Robards said. He had the gray, scraped look of a man who had not slept. "Harry, before you go in, whatever you feel about me after today, I want it on the table that I asked for this. I asked to be the one who brought you in because the alternative was that they sent someone who doesn't care whether you walk out, and I do. Remember that later, that's all I want, that you remember I asked." "I'll remember," Harry said, which was true, and gentler than the man deserved and crueler than he knew, because Harry had already decided what today was and Robards had not. The room beyond the door was round and windowless and older than the rest of the ministry, the stone unfaced, the floor worn in a wide pale ring by centuries of feet Harry could not account for. Three people waited at a table that had no head and no foot, because a table with no head is a table that tells you power in this room does not sit where you can see it. The first was Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minister for Magic, and the sight of him there cost Harry something because he had bled beside this man, and Kingsley's face when it turned up was heavy with the knowledge that he had bled beside Harry too and had come anyway. The second was a woman Harry did not know. She was perhaps 40, dark-haired, plainly dressed in the no color of the department, and she sat with her hands folded and her eyes down and gave off the specific quality of stillness that Harry had learned over 5 years of interrogations to associate not with calm but with a predator's economy, the absolute motionlessness of a thing that will not move at all until it moves entirely. The third was Saul Croker, who inclined his head in the manner of a man greeting a colleague arriving a little late to a meeting they had both agreed to hold. Auror Potter, Kingsley said, "Sit, this is not a tribunal. I want that understood before anything else is said. You are not charged with anything. You could not be because the thing we are here to discuss is a thing that in law does not exist, and I find myself in the position of a minister for magic asking a man I respect to stop doing something I am not permitted to name. You can imagine my morning has been strange." "Minister," Harry sat and gave them the man they were braced for, tired and wary and a half-step behind, a war hero out of his depth and beginning to grasp it. It was not a large lie, he was tired. He let them see the true tiredness and draw the false conclusion. "I don't understand what I'm supposed to have done." "No," said the dark-haired woman without lifting her eyes, in a voice like a key turning in a cold lock. "You don't. That is the only reason this is a conversation and not a cleaning." "Miriam," Croker murmured. "He should hear the word," she said. "He's not a child and coddling him wastes the mercy." "Auror Potter, my name is Miriam Sable. I hold no rank you can look up. My office does one thing, and it has done it without interruption since before your family had the name it died with, and the thing it does is find people who have begun to do what you have begun to do and end the doing. Usually the person does not survive the ending because usually the person is a fool who found a fragment and is already too far gone to be walked back. You are not a fool. You are not yet too far gone. That combination is rare enough that the minister and the keeper have overruled my professional recommendation, which was made 11 days ago and has not changed. So you are being offered something almost no one in 300 years has been offered, which is a door back. I advise you to take it before I am proven right about you because I am always, in the end, proven right." Harry looked at her, and behind the ordinary man face he wore, the tactical part of him that never slept made its notes. She was the one who mattered. Croker held the doctrine and the door, Kingsley held the office and the guilt, but this woman held the knife, and she had wanted him dead 11 days ago on the strength of a query in the records index, which meant the custodian's threshold for lethal force was not a bent field of reeds or a spoken name. It was noticing. She had recommended his death for the crime of noticing. He kept his hands loose on the table and his face open and let none of the calculation reach the surface. "What's the door?" he asked. Croker answered because doctrine was his to offer. "You accept a posting, somewhere far from London, somewhere the lay runs deep and quiet, and I can put people around you who will know if it stirs. You keep your wand, your name, your pension, your friends. You marry if you like, you grow old. In exchange you swear an oath, a real one of the binding kind, that you will never again reach for what you reached for in that house. The oath will hold you. It is not a promise or a Potter, it is a leash with teeth, and if you break it, it kills you cleanly wherever you are, and no one comes for you because no one has to. That is the door, a whole life freely lived inside one wall you agree never to touch. Most men would call it a bargain. Most men are never offered it. They are offered Miriam." "And if I say no, then you have chosen Miriam," said Croker, "and I will have failed, and I will grieve it, and it will change nothing." He folded his hands. "I am going to tell you the thing I think will move you because I have read your file until I know it better than you do. You believe you are being asked to be smaller. You are not. You are being asked to be one of the very few men in history trusted to be told the truth and left alive to carry it. That is not smaller. That is the largest thing this ministry has to give. Take the night. Give me your answer tomorrow. And understand that Miriam Sable will spend that night no more than a room away from wherever you sleep, and that this is not a threat. It is simply the truth of your situation now, and I would rather you knew the truth than mistook our patience for weakness." Harry took the night. He said he would think and let them see him shaken, and let Robards walk him to the lift with a hand on his shoulder. The man had not earned the right to lay there, and rode up through the ministry composing, behind the shaken face, the single most important intelligence assessment of his life. He had walked into their trap and come out with the whole map. He knew the shape of the offer, which meant he knew the shape of the fear behind the offer. He knew Sable was the blade and Croker the mind and Kingsley the reluctant seal. He knew they had a binding oath that could kill a man across any distance, which was itself a piece of the buried art, which meant the custodians did not merely guard the root. They used it in the narrow sanctioned ways the doctrine permitted, hypocrites at the door of the temple they had sworn to keep shut. And he knew above all the one thing they did not know they had told him, that their entire method rested on detection. On noticing the doer before the doing grew large. Sable found people, that was the whole of the office. Take away her ability to find, and the knife had nothing to cut. He went home and did not sleep, and a little after midnight the wall of the library declined to be a wall, and he stepped through it into the fens, where Orm was waiting with a fire and a hard smile and the first real lesson in how to disappear. They had 5 weeks before the oath he had not sworn came due in the only calendar that mattered, which was Sable's patience, and Orm spent the first of them teaching Harry not to do magic. You are thinking of the root as a weapon, Orm said on the second night when Harry had asked too eagerly to draw again. It is not a weapon is a thing you can be caught holding. The first art, the oldest art, the one they fear most and understand least, is not the drawing, it is the not being found. Sable's people cannot feel a wand. They have spent their lives learning to feel the other thing, the disturbance a warden makes in the root simply by being what he is, the way a heavy man makes a hollow in a mattress even lying still. You made an enormous hollow the night you bent the reeds. You have been making a smaller one every night since, just by coming here, just by being a lit thing in a dark field. Before I teach you to do anything, I am going to teach you to lie flat enough on the surface of the world that the surface forgets your weight. It is called the stillness. It is the whole reason I have lived 90 years with a death warrant older than my grandmother, and it is the most boring thing you will ever learn, and it will keep you alive after everything else I teach you has done its best to get you killed. So Harry learned the stillness. He learned to draw the root and give off no more disturbance than a sleeping man, to hold power the way a held breath holds air, present but silent. He learned to walk the lay without leaving awake. He learned, hardest of all, to want and not to draw, to feel the sea rise to the soles of his feet each night and to leave it there until the wanting stopped being a fire and became a tool, a thing he owned instead of a thing that owned him. It went against every instinct a life of throwing stones had built. It took 3 weeks. On the night he finally held the full tide behind his sternum and gave off nothing, no hollow, no wake, no lit thing in a dark field, Orm walked a slow circle around him with his gold eyes half shut and his long hands reading the air and could not feel him, and stopped and looked at the young man standing invisible in plain sight in the middle of the fen and said the closest thing to praise Harry ever heard from him. There, Orm said quietly. Now you are dangerous. Everything before tonight was a child playing with matches. A man who can hold that much and not be felt is the thing Article 9 was written to forbid, and you are the first one to exist in 100 years, and Miriam Sable is sleeping 3 rooms from an empty bed in London wondering why the hollow she's been tracking went out like a snuffed candle, and she does not yet understand that it did not go out. It learned to hide. He came close and the firelight caught the gold. From tonight we build. But you will build behind the stillness, always, every hour awake and asleep, until it is not a thing you do but a thing you are. The day you forget it is the day she finds you. Say it back to me. The day I forget the stillness is the day she finds me. Good, now let me show you what the not being found was always for. What it was for was the work, and the work was a country Harry had not known the map of the world contained. Orm taught him the 4 disciplines the way a man teaches a language he has spoken so long he has forgotten it was ever learned, sideways in fragments, by doing. There was the drawing, which Harry already knew the terrible sweetness of, the pulling of raw force up out of the lay to be spent on the world, in which Orm rationed like a physician rationing a drug. A cupful a night, never more, watching Harry's face the whole time for the flush that meant the wanting was winning. There was the naming, which was subtler and stranger, the true speech that rose in him unlearned whenever he stood in the stillness and let it come. The sounds that were not words but the actual names of things, of reeds and water and stone and wind, and which, spoken correctly, let a man ask the world to remember what a thing could be and to become it again. There was the warding, the persuasion worked upon land and stone and threshold, the art that made Orm's cottage nowhere and Grimmauld Place stubborn, that could take a place and fold it gently out of the reach of maps and men. And there was the 4th, which Orm did not teach for a long time, and which, when he finally did, changed everything Harry thought he understood about what he was becoming. Once, and only once in the 4th week, Orm let him draw more than a cup. It was a still night, the lay running close and warm under the frost, and the old man stood him at the exact center of the ring of stones and told him that he would now feel, one time under supervision, the thing he was being taught every other night to refuse, so that his refusal would be a choice made by a man who knew what he was refusing and not a fear held by a man who had never dared. A soldier who has never seen the country he is defending will surrender it, Orm said. Tonight you see the country, then every night after you choose to hold the line, draw, not a cup. Draw until I tell you to stop, and trust that I will tell you before it is too late, because if I am wrong about the timing we will both learn something and only one of us will survive learning it. Harry stood in the stillness and stopped refusing, and the sea came. It came the way dawn comes to a man who has only ever seen candlelight, not brighter but wider, a widening with no edge to it, the gold rising up through the soles of his feet and his legs and his spine until it was not rising into him at all but rising as him, until the boundary between the standing figure and the standing water and the frost on the stones and the cold black arc of the sky thinned to a rumor and then to nothing. He felt the fen for a mile in every direction as he felt his own skin. He felt the frozen surface of the meres and the slow deep churn of the peat and the sleeping heartbeats of 10,000 roosting birds and the long-buried memory of the drowned. And above it, threaded through the whole cold country like veins of molten brass poured into the body of the land, the lay itself, luminous, patient, without bottom. And it was pouring up into the place where Harry Potter used to be, and it was glad. It was so terribly glad. It had been waiting under the floor of the world for 300 years for a channel it could trust, and here at last was one, and it wanted to give him everything, the whole ocean at once, all of it now. He could have raised the standing stones off their hummock and set them turning in the sky like a slow crown. He could have called the drowned up out of the black water to walk the reeds again. He could have reached and kept reaching and been for one incandescent instant the largest thing that had walked these islands since the sundering, and then been nothing at all, a burned place in the shape of a man, and the sea would have mourned him for exactly as long as it took to look for the next channel, which is to say not at all. "Stop," said Orm from very far away and very close. "Now come back, let it down. Cup by cup the way you were taught, all the way down, and do not grasp on the way, do not keep a mouthful, come all the way back to the man." And Harry, standing at the heart of an ocean that loved him and would gladly destroy him, did the hardest thing the buried art had yet asked of him, which was to let go of glory on purpose, to lower the tide cup by cup back down through his legs and out through the soles of his feet into the mud, until he was only a man again, small and cold and shaking in a ring of stones, hollowed and human, and for the rest of his life, unable to unknow what he had held. He understood then why Orm had shown him, not to tempt him, to inoculate him. A man who has felt the whole ocean once under control and chosen to set it down has a truer refusal in him than a man who merely fears the water. He had seen the country now. Every night after, he would choose to hold the line, and the choosing would be real because he knew exactly what he was declining. "There is an art," Orm said on a later night when the frost had come down hard and the standing stones wore collars of white, "that the ministry fears above all the others, more than the drawing that can level a town, more than the naming that can turn a river. They fear it because it is the one art against which their entire civilization has no answer, because their entire civilization is spells, and this is the unmaking of spells. We call it the Sundering, which is a grim joke because it shares its name with the catastrophe, and the joke is that the same art that nearly ended the world is also the only thing that can reliably save a man from it. Listen to me, because this is the art that will keep you alive when Sable stops trying to talk and starts trying to kill. Every spell ever cast is a knot. A wand wizard ties a knot in the world quickly, cheaply, and the knot holds until it unravels on its own or another knot cuts it. You are not going to cut their knots. You are going to do something they cannot conceive of because it is not in their grammar. You are going to reach into any spell thrown at you, find the name of the intention that tied it, and ask the root to remember that the knot was never truly there. And the knot will not be there, not blocked, not countered, unmade, as if the hand that tied it had never risen." He held up one long finger, and the frost on the nearest stone crawled up it and made a ring of ice, and then he spoke a sound with no vowels, and the ice was simply water running down his knuckle, not melted, unfrozen, the freezing withdrawn from the history of the moment. "That is a child's version on a child's spell. But there is no adult version, Mr. Potter. There is only more: a shield charm, a curse, a killing curse, a ward 100 wizards spent a year to raise. The Sundering does not care how strong the knot is. It cares only that a knot is a made thing, and made things can be asked to have never been made if you know their true name and you are standing in the stillness and your hand is steady. This is why they buried us, not because we could kill. Anyone can kill, because we could not in the end be killed by anything they knew how to make." Harry learned the Sundering across a fortnight of frost, and it was the coldest, most exact, most patient art of the four, and it suited him. He unmade small spells Orm threw at him, then larger ones, then on the last night before the frost broke, a curse Orm flung across the fen in genuine anger to see whether Harry had understood or merely memorized, a whip of black light that would have opened him from shoulder to hip. Harry stood in the stillness and did not flinch, and reached into the curse as it crossed the last yard between them, found the shape of the will that had thrown it, spoke the name of the unmaking, and the curse was not there. It did not shatter against a shield, it did not veer. It arrived at the place where Harry stood, carrying the full murderous intention of a warden who had held his strength for 90 years, and it simply had never been cast, the black light gone as though the eye had invented it, and Orm stood across the fen with his empty hand still raised and looked at Harry Potter for a long moment in the starlight. "I have never," the old man said at last, "seen anyone learn that in a fortnight. It took me 4 years. My master told me it took him a decade." He lowered his hand. "You should be dead. I threw that to kill. Some part of me, I think, wanted to know whether the world would let me be the last after all, so that this would end quietly with me and no one would ever have to find out what you might become. And you unmade it in the space between one step and the next, and now I am the man who taught you, and there is no putting that back in the ground." He turned toward the cottage, and his voice, when it came again, was low. "Come and eat. Tomorrow the frost breaks and your 5 weeks are gone, and Sable will stop waiting for an answer. We had better decide what answer she gets." The ministry felt it, of course, not the Sundering, which left nothing to feel, and not the stillness, which was the whole point. They felt the one thing Harry could not hide, which was that a hollow that had gone out 3 weeks ago in London had begun, faintly, intermittently, to reappear in the fens, and to move and to grow, and then maddeningly to vanish again for days. A thing that was there and not there, that could not be tracked because it seemed to obey no law of persistence. A candle that lit and snuffed and lit again in a marsh where no wizard had any business being. Harry learned all this from Hermione in fragments in the dead hours passed to him through a system they had built without ever quite discussing it. A book left face down in a particular pub, a chalk mark on a particular wall, the small tradecraft of 2 people who had run from the whole world once before and remembered how. She was frightened now, properly frightened, and hiding it under a mountain of competence, and what she brought him was worth more than she knew. "There's a unit," she told him, in the back of the pub off Diagon. Both of them turned toward the wall, 2 old friends having a quiet pint. "Off the books, obviously, but it draws on real resources, and I can see the resources move even when I can't see the unit. Someone requisitioned 4 field unspeakables and a warrant of exception, which is a document I did not know existed until last Tuesday and which, as far as I can tell, is a piece of parchment that makes murder legal if you're the right office and you don't write down whose. They're calling their target the Fen anomaly. They don't have a name, they don't have a face. They have a hollow in the world that keeps going out, and it is driving a woman named Sable to the edge of something, because in 300 years she has never lost one and she is losing this one, and I have sat in 2 meetings now where she said, quite calmly, that the fact that the anomaly can hide from her is itself proof that it must be destroyed because a warden she can catch is a fool and a warden she cannot catch is the end of the world. Hermione turned her glass. Harry, she's not wrong to be afraid. That's what I can't stop thinking. Everything you've become, everything I've decided to help you become because I love you and because they lied and because the lie is monstrous, all of it is also exactly the thing that ended the world once. I've read Article 9 now. I've read what's left of the Sundering Histories. And when Sable says the end of the world, she's not being dramatic, she's being precise. So I need you to tell me, and I need you to not comfort me, that you are going to be the exception. Because the whole of history says the exception doesn't exist. I'm going to be the exception, Harry said. Everyone says that. Everyone doesn't have a teacher whose entire lesson is how not to become the thing you're afraid of. He looked at her and let her see for once past the ordinary man face into the discipline underneath, the cold governed center where the wanting lived on its leash. The reason they buried this, Hermione, isn't that it's evil. It's that they couldn't imagine anyone holding it who wasn't. They built their whole world on the belief that power this large can only ever be a fire. I'm going to be the proof they were wrong, not for them. I don't care about them, for me, because I've spent my whole life being handed leashes by people who couldn't imagine me choosing the right thing without one, and I am done proving them right by needing the leash. That's the exception. It's not that I can't fall. It's that I've decided not to, and I've found the one man alive who can teach me how a decision like that is actually made hour by hour for the rest of a life. Sable can't catch me. And the thing she's really afraid of, the Sundering, the God King, the end of the world, she's never going to see it, because I'm going to spend the next 50 years making very sure she's wrong about who I am. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face let go, not her fear, which she would carry now for the rest of her life, but the worst thing under it, the thing that had been asking whether she had helped a friend or armed a monster. All right, she said quietly. All right, then let me tell you the last thing, and then I have to go before someone notices I've been having a very long drink with the most watched man in Britain. They're moving on the Fens tomorrow night. Sable pushed it through this afternoon. 4 unspeakables, the warrant of exception, and instructions to take the anomaly if they can and to unmake it if they can't. And Harry, they don't know it's you. They still think you swore the oath and went to Cornwall to grow old. Your posting paperwork went through a week ago and everyone stopped watching your flat. Whatever the anomaly is, they think it's someone else. You have that. It is the only thing you have. Use it. They came for Orm. Harry felt it before he saw it, standing in the stillness on the hummock among the stones a little after moonrise, holding the tide behind his sternum and giving off nothing, when the persuasion Orm had worked upon the land for 90 years developed, all at once, a wound. It was the strangest sensation he had ever had, the feeling of a place being convinced it could be found, the marsh's long stubborn refusal to be on any map bending under a pressure applied from 4 directions at once, patient and expert, 4 minds that had spent their lives learning exactly how a warden's ward was tied and exactly where to worry it until it frayed. He understood, standing very still in the dark, that the custodians had not sent hunters. They had sent unpickers. And that Cashin Orm, who had been the Fen anomaly for 90 years before Harry ever spoke a name in a library, was in his cottage below, old and tired and out of frost, and had perhaps 3 minutes before the land forgot how to hide him. Harry did not run down the hummock. Running was noise, and noise was awake, and awake was the one thing that would tell the 4 unpickers that the anomaly they were tracking had grown a second head. He walked in the stillness invisible down to the cottage where the old man stood in the doorway watching the 4 points of pressure close on his life's one refuge with the calm of a man who has always known the day would come and is mildly interested to see how. They found the weft, Orm said, not turning. I felt it go 3 nights ago and told myself I imagined it. I did not imagine it. That is Sable's work, only she teaches them to unpick from 4 sides at once. There are 4 of them in the reeds, and they are perhaps a minute from standing in my kitchen, and I am 91 years old and I have not drawn my full strength in 40 years because a man who draws his full strength at my age does not survive the drawing. He turned then, and the gold eyes found Harry unerringly in the dark despite the stillness, because a master can always find his own student. So this is where it ends for me, and that is all right. I have been ready for a very long time. But it does not have to end here for the work. You can be through that wall and 100 miles from here before they reach the door. Go now. Let them have an old man in a burned cottage and a mystery, and let them believe the anomaly died in the Fens and live and grow and be the exception somewhere they will never think to look. That is the last lesson. Knowing when the board is lost and saving the one piece that matters. Go. Harry looked at the old man in the doorway and at the 4 points of expert pressure closing in the reeds, and made the decision the whole of his old life had trained him to make and the whole of his new discipline told him to refuse, and refused the refusal because there are 2 kinds of men who survive, and he had spent 5 years being the kind who leaves, and he was done. No, Harry said. You taught me the Sundering. Let's find out if I understood the lesson. He walked out past Orm into the reeds, into the stillness, holding the whole cold tide of the fen behind his sternum and giving off nothing at all, a warden the four best trackers of the buried art in Britain could not feel because he had spent 3 weeks learning to weigh nothing on the surface of the world, and he went to meet the first men they would ever fail to catch. They were good. He gave them that from the start, moving between them in the dark, unseen cataloging. They came in the old formation, a diamond around the point they meant to unpick. No lights, no words, communicating in the small hand signs of a unit that had worked together for years. 4 figures in the no color of the department wading the black water with wands held low and level and their attention fixed forward on the cottage and its old man, on the hollow they knew, tracking the disturbance Orm could not help making, blind to the far larger nothing walking a slow circle around them all. Harry took the Eastern man first because the Eastern man was the one whose feet had found the edge of the deep channel, the black water that was deeper than 300 years. He did not touch him. He did not throw anything. He stood 10 feet away in the reeds, invisible, and spoke very quietly into the stillness the true name of the water and asked the root to remember what the water was, which was hungry and old and full of the memory of every man it had ever taken. The channel did not rise. It did nothing a witness would have seen. It merely became, for one moment, entirely itself, and the Eastern unspeakable took one more ordinary step and found no bottom where a bottom had been a heartbeat before, and the black water folded over him without a splash and introduced him at last to everyone it had kept, and the reeds closed, and the diamond was 3. The others felt it. Not the naming, which left no wake, but the sudden absence of their fourth, the gap in the formation where a man had been. One of them made the sign to hold. Another, younger, panicked and did the thing they were trained never to do, which was to cast, throwing up a wide flat sweep of revealing light meant to strip the reeds bare and show whatever had taken the Eastern man. It was a good spell, competent, exactly the spell the situation demanded. It swept out across the black water in a plane of cold silver and reached the place where Harry stood, and Harry reached into it as it arrived, found the name of the intention that had tied it and unmade the knot, and the light was not there, not blocked, not scattered, never cast, the reeds stayed dark. And now the three of them understood in the way a hunter understands the instant the woods go wrong that they were not the diamond around the point, they were the point. Something had been circling them the whole time, and it had just eaten one of their spells the way it had eaten their fourth man, without effort, without a sound, without leaving on the night one thread they could pull. Anomaly, the eldest of the three said aloud, and there was in the single word the whole recalibration of 300 years of doctrine, a professional watching the floor of his profession give way. It's the anomaly, it's here, it's already inside the formation, fall back to the exception and burn the ground. The one carrying the warrant of exception reached inside his robe for it, and Harry, who had spent an evening being told exactly what that document was and what it made legal, moved for the first time all night. He came out of the stillness the last 3 steps, deliberately letting them feel the hollow open in the world right on top of them, letting the full weight of what had been circling them arrive all at once. A warden standing suddenly in their midst in the black water with no wand in his hand and the whole cold tide of the fen banked behind his eyes, and he spoke the name of the parchment as the man drew it, the true name of the thing, which was a lie written to make a killing clean. And he asked the root to remember that the lie had never been true. The warrant did not burn, it did not tear. It was, between one instant and the next, a blank sheet, then not even that, the ink and the intention and the constitutional exemption at the bottom of a boring page all withdrawn from the history of the world, so that the man stood holding nothing, his warrant to commit murder unmade at the root, and with it the one thing that had made these 4 killers something other than 4 murderers in a marsh. "You came out here," Harry said, and his voice was very level, and it carried across the water the way a cold thing carries, "to unmake a man in his own home under a piece of paper that said it wasn't murder. I've just unmade the paper. Now it's only the 3 of you and the water and me, and no document anywhere that says what happens next was legal. So think very carefully about the next spell you cast, because I will take it out of the world the way I took your friends, and I will take the man who cast it the way the water took the man who found the channel, and there is not tonight a single thing your office can do about any of it. Go home, tell Sable the anomaly let you leave, tell her I could have kept all 4 and I kept none, and let her spend the rest of her life understanding what that means." They went. They were professionals, and professionals know a lost board when they are standing in the middle of one. And they gathered themselves in their drowned man's absence, and they backed out of the reeds the way they had come. And the last thing the eldest did before the dark took them was to look for a long moment at the young man standing wandless and unbothered in water that had just swallowed a colleague, trying and failing to fit what he was seeing into anything his 300 years of doctrine had prepared him for. Harry let him look because a witness who cannot explain what he saw is worth more than a body. He stood in the reeds until the last disturbance of their leaving had faded from the root, and then he walked back to the cottage, where Orm stood in the doorway exactly as he had left him, the old gold eyes moving over Harry with something that was not quite disbelief. "You unmade a warrant of exception," Orm said, "before it was drawn. Do you understand what that is? That is not a curse or a shield. That is an instrument of the ministry itself, a made thing of law and oath and signature, and you reached into it and asked the root to forget it, and the root obliged. There is nothing they can make, Mr. Potter, that you cannot ask the world to unmake, not their curses, not their wards, not their laws, not, in the end, their seal." He stepped back to let Harry into the warm. "I taught you the sundering to keep you alive. I did not understand until tonight that I have taught the last warden of the root how to unmake the ministry of magic one made thing at a time, and that you understood it before I did, standing in the water, and chose to unmake a document instead of a man. That choice is the whole of you, hold on to it. You are going to be tested on it, and the test is going to get worse. Behind them, out in the black water, the fen lay flat and patient under the moon, 300 years deep, and kept its newest guest with all the others, and told no one, because the fen had never in its long life answered a single question the ministry knew how to ask. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The ministry's alarmed Saul Croker had kept the interdict for 31 years, and in that time he had signed off on the deaths of 9 people, and he remembered all 9, and he had never once lost a hunter. On the morning after the fens, he sat in the round, windowless room with the worn pale ring in the floor and read the report of a unit that had gone into a marsh 4 strong and come out 3, and he understood that the century of his tenure had just ended and a different century had begun, and that he was, at 78, going to have to be cleverer than he had ever needed to be. He did not raise his voice. He had never in his life raised his voice. It was one of the reasons the office feared him more than it feared Sable, who at least could be provoked. He read the report twice, laid it flat, aligned its edge with the edge of the table, and looked at the 3 people the morning had left him. Miriam Sable, who had lost a man and would not sleep until it was answered. Gawain Robards, who had been summoned and did not yet know why, and had the wary stillness of a competent man in a room above his clearance. And by his own insistence and against Croker's advice, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minister for Magic, who alone among them had the authority to be here and the least real power in the room, because Article 40 had made certain 300 years ago that on this one subject the minister could watch and could not command. Tell me what we know, Croker said, and then tell me what we are afraid of, and keep the 2 lists separate, because the second list is where mistakes are made, Sable told him. What they knew was this, that the Fen anomaly was a fully trained warden, not a fragment-mad amateur but a disciplined practitioner working from the complete grammar, that it had killed 1 unspeakable and spared 3, which was not mercy but message, that it had unmade a warrant of exception before it was drawn, which meant it could reach into the instruments of the ministry itself and ask the world to forget them. And that it had held the stillness so completely that 4 of the best trackers alive had walked into the center of its circle and felt nothing until it chose to be felt. What they were afraid of was simpler and worse. They were afraid that there was a teacher. A fragment-mad amateur taught himself out of a stolen scrap and burned out inside a year. That was the pattern of 3 centuries, and the custodians had grown comfortable inside it. A fully trained warden meant the old lore had survived somewhere whole in a living hand and had found a living student, and that the century of comfortable amateurs was over, and that somewhere in Britain the discipline the conquered had spent everything to bury was being passed on correctly to someone who did not burn. There is one of them left, Croker said when she had finished. We have always assumed the last of the old wardens died in hiding decades ago because the surface never stirred. We were wrong, he did not die. He simply learned to weigh nothing, and he has spent a lifetime being the ripple we could never quite catch and dismissed as instrument error, and now at the end of his life he has found an heir. That is the teacher. Find the teacher and we have both. Fail and the heir outlives the teacher, and there is a warden loose in the world for the next 70 years who can unmake anything we build, and the interdict, which has held since 1692, ends inside our lifetimes, on our watch, because we grew lazy inside a pattern. He turned his pale, still eyes on Robards. Which brings me to you, head Auror. You are here because your office is my net. It has always been my net since before your grandfather, though only its head is ever told so, and now you are told. Every unexplained death, every odd query, every clever young officer who notices the wrong salt flows up through you to me, and it has, and you have served it well without ever quite letting yourself know what you were serving. I need you to stop not knowing. I need you to think now with the whole of your considerable mind about who in this country could have taught a warden and who in this country could have learned. And I will tell you so that you understand the size of what I am asking, that I already have a name for the student, and I am praying to be wrong, and I am almost never wrong. Robard said nothing. But something moved in his face, the sick internal arithmetic of a man who has just been handed the last 2 numbers of a sum he has spent 11 days refusing to complete, and Croker watched it move and was sorry and went on anyway, because sorrow was a thing he had long ago learned to feel and set aside in the same motion. Auror Potter accepted the accommodation, Croker said, in writing. He was to travel to Cornwall and take the binding oath from the resident custodian there, and then live his quiet life under a quiet watch. Miriam brought me the Cornwall log this morning. He never arrived. The oath was never administered. There is a cottage waiting for him on a cliff that has been empty for 5 weeks, and a resident custodian who has been told all this time that the posting was delayed by paperwork because the paperwork said accepted, and no one thought to ask why accepted had not become arrived. He let it sit. So. A war hero of unmatched natural power, of a bloodline I personally warned to be careful of its inheritance, vanishes on the way to swear the one oath that would have made him safe, and in the same 5 weeks a fully trained warden appears in the fens and cannot be caught. Tell me, head Auror, as the man who recruited him and knows his mind. Am I wrong? The room waited. Kingsley Shacklebolt had gone very still, the stillness of a man watching two things he cared about, a friend and a government, and understanding that he was about to lose the ability to protect either. No, Robard said. His voice came out level, and it cost him everything he had to keep it level. You're not wrong. Kingsley spoke then for the first time since the report was laid down, and he spoke to Croker, and the two men looked at each other across 300 years of a constitution that had made one of them a servant of the people and the other servant of a silence, and had arranged very deliberately for the second to outrank the first on precisely this ground. He fought for us, Kingsley said, when he was a child. He walked into a forest and let a man kill him so that the rest of us could live. I signed the order that gave him a medal for it, and now you are going to sit in this room and plan his death, and I am going to be constitutionally forbidden from stopping you, and I want it in the record, Saul, the record no one will ever read, that the Minister for Magic objected. Your objection is noted, Croker said, and meant it, and it changed nothing, and both of them knew it. And I will tell you, Minister, because you have earned the truth even where you have not earned the authority, that I do not want his death. I have never wanted a single one of the 9. I want the interdict to hold, and I want it to hold without another body, and those two wants have been the same want for 31 years and are about to stop being the same want, and I am too old to pretend I don't know which one I'll choose when they finally part. I buried a great deal to keep the peace. I will bury him too if he makes me, and I will remember him with the other 9, and I will sleep, because a man who cannot sleep after doing a necessary and terrible thing has no business being the one trusted to do it. He aligned the report's edge with the table's edge again, a man restoring order to the one surface he could still control. But I would rather he lived, so we do it in the right order. We do not hunt him first. First we take away the reasons he might listen to us, one by one, until listening is the only door left, and then we open that door very wide and pray he is the kind of man who walks through it rather than the kind who burns the house. Miriam, you will not touch him. You will touch everything around him gently, visibly, until he understands the shape of the wall closing on the people he loves, and then we make the offer one last time and we see what he is. He looked at the worn pale ring in the floor, 300 years of feet. That is the whole of strategy against a man who cannot be caught. You do not catch him. You arrange the world until the thing he wants and the thing that destroys him are the same object, and then you hand it to him and you let him choose. It has worked before. It is in the end what we did to the last age. We did not defeat them. We waited until their power and their ruin were one thing, and then we simply stood back. The cottage in the fens was gone. They had not waited for the ministry to unpick the weft a second time. On the morning after the confrontation, Orm had walked the perimeter of the standing stones one last time, laying his long young hands on each in turn, speaking to them the way a man speaks to old servants he is dismissing with honor. And then he had gathered the wall of hand-bound books into a single trunk that should not have held a tenth of them, and did, and he had unmade his own ward deliberately, the persuasion he had worked upon the land for 90 years. Releasing the fen back into the ordinary world so that when Sable's people came again they would find only mud and stones, and no trace that a warden had ever lived here, no hollow, no weft, nothing to worry at. They will read the emptiness correctly, Orm said, standing in the wet grass where his home had been. Sable will know I chose to go, which tells her I am disciplined, which frightens her more than if she had burned me out. Good, let her carry that. We are past the time when I could hide and outlive them. That time ended when you walked into the reeds instead of through the wall. From today we do not hide from the hunt. We move ahead of it and we choose the ground and we make them come to us where the coming costs them. He looked at Harry, and the gold eyes had a light in them that had not been there 5 weeks ago, the light of an old man who had made his peace with dying quietly and then, at the very end, been handed a reason to want to see how the story came out. You have a choice to make, and I have carried you as far as a teacher can carry a student who has already surpassed him in the one art that matters, so you beat 4 of them and you did it clean. What do you want, Mr. Potter? Not what will you settle for. Not what can you survive. What do you want now that you know you can take almost anything and hold it without falling? Say it plainly, because a man who cannot say what he wants ends up being used by men who can. Harry looked out over the released fen, the ordinary marsh under an ordinary sky, the black channel where a man had drowned, and he said the plain thing, and it had been assembling in him since a card in the records level had written itself a warning, since a note in his own recruiter's hand had begged him to grow old, signing off on natural causes. I want the codex, Harry said. Not to read it, to take it out of their hands. As long as it sits in that chamber, they own the one thing I don't have, the whole grammar, everything you carried out in fragments and everything you couldn't, and as long as they own it they can raise another generation of Sables and Crokers to guard it, and in 70 years when I'm dead they bury the whole thing again and the lie goes on. I don't want to escape them, Orm. Escaping is just a slower kind of losing. I want to end the reason they exist. I want to walk into the one building where a warden is supposed to be unmade at the door, past the men whose whole lives are the door, into the chamber with no door, and I want to take the thing they built their entire 300-year silence around, and I want them to know it was me, and I want them to understand that there is nothing they can make that I cannot unmake, including their seal, including their oath, including, in the end, their monopoly on what magic is allowed to be. That's what I want. You asked? Orm was quiet for a long moment, and the wind moved the reeds where no persuasion held them now. Yes, he said at last. I rather thought it would be that. It is the right want, and it is the most dangerous want, and they are tragically the same want they always are. That is the whole problem the Conquered was trying to solve and could only solve by burying. So, I will help you, not because your want is safe. Because you are the first person I have met in 90 years who wants the largest possible thing and might still be governed enough to survive getting it. And because a world where the codex stays in that chamber is a world where the lie wins. And I have spent my whole life on the losing side of that lie, and I would like, before I die, to see it cost them something. But hear me, Harry Potter, and hear me as your teacher one last time before I become something nearer your ally. The chamber has no door because a door can be unmade, and you can unmake almost anything, so they did not use a door. They used men. The seal on the codex is not a lock. It is the sworn, bound, self-renewing will of a line of custodians who have given their lives to keeping it shut, and it renews through their oath, and their oath is the oldest and most tightly tied-made thing in Britain, and to reach the codex you will have to unmake that. You will have to reach into a living man's binding oath, the thing he has built his whole self upon, and ask the world to forget it. And I do not know what that does to the man. No one has done it since the sundering. It may free him, it may kill him, it may do a thing I have no name for. That is the price of what you want, and you should know it now in the daylight with mud on your boots, and not discover it in the dark at the last door with your hand already inside another man's soul. Harry took the warning and turned it over and did not flinch from it, and then he did the thing that was becoming the truest habit of his new life, which was to stop looking at the size of the obstacle and start looking at its structure. "Tell me how the seal is built," he said, "not that its men, how. If it renews through their oath, then it has a shape and a rhythm and a weakest hour, because everything a person maintains by will has an hour when the will is thinnest. And if I have to unmake a living man's oath, then I want to do it in the hour it is easiest to unmake and hardest for him to feel me doing it." Orm looked at him for a moment, and the look had respect in it and something colder underneath, the recognition of a student who had stopped asking whether a thing could be done and begun asking only how. "The oath is a chain," he said, "not a metaphor. A chain of custodians, living and dead, each link a man who swore, and the swearing binds the next to the last, so that the seal is held not by one will but by the whole unbroken line reaching back to 1692, every keeper who ever kept it still lending his weight to the shut door across the grave. That is why it has never failed. You do not face Croker's will at that chamber. You face Croker's will and every will behind him, 3 centuries of dead men who gave their lives to a promise and are still in the way of bound things keeping it." He let that land. "The weakest hour is the changing of the keeper. When one custodian dies and the next takes up the oath, there is a moment, a single moment, when the chain passes through one living hand and the dead are briefly holding on to nothing, waiting to be gathered up again by the new keeper's word. In that moment the seal is thinner than it will be for another lifetime. Croker is 78, he will not last many more years. And the man who understands this, Mr. Potter, and who can hold the stillness through a custodian's dying and reach the chamber in the 1 hour the chain hangs loose, is the man who takes the codex without ever having to unmake a living soul, because he takes it in the gap between one soul and the next." "Then I don't wait for Croker to die of age," Harry said slowly, and the plan assembled itself in the daylight the way plans did for him now, complete, cold, and terrible. "I make the changing of the keeper happen on the hour I choose, not by killing him, by something else. There's a whole grammar we haven't touched yet, isn't there? Ways to make a man set down an oath he'd never break without breaking him." "There is," Orm said, "and it is the darkest room in the whole house of the root, and I have not shown it to you because I was not sure until this morning that you could stand inside it and come out the same shape. Now I think you can. Now I am afraid that you can. We will go into that room, Harry, because you have found the true door and there is no other way through it, but not today. Today you have a woman with a knife who cannot reach you, and the moment she truly accepts that she cannot reach you, she will reach instead for everyone you love, because it is the only lever left to a hunter who has lost the scent, and I have watched her kind do it for 90 years. Before we learn to unmake a keeper, we are going to learn to make your people disappear, because a man cannot plan a siege while his flank is a fistful of hostages waiting on a railway platform." They came for Harry's cover on a Tuesday, and they came the way Croker did everything, quietly, completely, and a step ahead of where Harry expected. They did not raid Grimmauld Place. The house was still too stubborn, and Sable was too careful to spend the surprise of a raid on a target who could unmake the raid. Instead, they simply stopped pretending he was in Cornwall. The Prophet ran a small notice planted that Auror Potter had taken indefinite personal leave, which was the ministry's way of telling every person in the country who knew how to read the ministry that Harry Potter was no longer accounted for and no longer protected. His vault was frozen gently in administrative hold pending review. The witch stopped eating lunch at the fountain because there was no longer any reason to watch a man everyone now knew was watching back. And the raven left the ledge outside the Auror office window, and in its place on the Tuesday evening, sitting at Harry's own desk in the emptied office as though he had every right, was Gawain Robards waiting with a bottle of the office whiskey and 2 glasses, exactly as an old man had once waited in a chair in a library, and the echo was not lost on either of them. "I let myself in," Robards said. "I still have the key. I don't imagine I'll have it much longer." He filled both glasses and pushed one across the desk and did not drink from his own. "Sit down, Harry. I know you don't have to. I know I couldn't stop you leaving or make you stay or do a single thing in this room you didn't allow. Croker explained it to me this morning, what you are, what you can do. I've been the head of this office for 4 years, and I found out this morning that I've spent all 4 of them being a net for a department I didn't know I answered to, catching clever men like you and passing them up the line, and telling myself I was keeping the peace. He turned his glass without lifting it. I flagged Croydon, you should know that. The morning you filed it, the words came off your report and into a channel I never knew I was part of, and by that evening Croker was in a corridor waiting for you, and I told myself when I heard that it was for your own good that they'd frighten you off and you'd be safe. I've told myself that about you a great many times. It's the sentence I've built my life out of, for your own good. Harry sat. He did it deliberately, a courtesy the man had not earned and Harry chose to extend, because he had decided a long 5 weeks ago what kind of man he was going to be in rooms like this, and it was not the kind who stood over the fallen to make himself feel tall. You knew, Harry said, from the first day. You came to my desk and begged me to take the quiet life, and the whole time you'd already handed my query to the man who was going to hunt me. I begged you because I meant it. And now Robards did look at him, and the gray, competent face had come apart at last, and under it was the thing Orm had described in a fenland doorway 5 weeks ago, a good man's real grief offered up freely at no cost to the machine that had used it. I still mean it, Harry, there's still a door. Croker told me to find it in you to talk you back, and I said I'd try, and I'm trying now, and I know it won't work. And I'm doing it anyway because the alternative is that I go home tonight having done nothing at all while a boy I pulled out of the rubble walks into the one building in Britain that exists to unmake him. Take the oath. It's not too late, I'll go with you. I'll stand there while they bind you and I'll shake your hand after and you'll be alive, and in 50 years you'll be alive, and that is worth more than whatever you think you're going to take out of that chamber. You called me a boy, Harry said, without heat, almost gently, and something in the gentleness stopped Robards where a raised voice would have let him keep going. You've all been calling me some version of that my whole life, a boy who needs protecting, a boy who mustn't be told. A boy who has to be handed a leash for his own good by people who love him, so that the leash feels like love and I feel like an ungrateful child for hating it. You recruited me by telling me you could make me into something other than a symbol, and I believed you, and it turned out the something was a well-behaved man who signs off on natural causes and never asks what killed them, and you flagged my very first real question to the men who bury the answers, and you have the nerve tonight with your grief all over your face to call it saving me. He pushed the untouched glass an inch back toward Robards. I'm not going to hurt you, Gawain. I want you to understand that clearly because you've spent all morning learning what I can do and you flinched just now when I moved my hand and you're ashamed of the flinch. I'm not going to hurt you. You're not worth unmaking and you're not my enemy. You're just a man who loved me the way a jailer loves a favorite prisoner and mistook the loving for the freeing and never once in 4 years noticed the difference because the difference was the whole thing they were paying you not to notice. Robards did not. There was no answer, and both of them knew it, and Harry stood and looked for a moment at the office where he had spent 5 years being the well-behaved version of himself, at the charmed window showing its honest rain at the desk that had been his. Tell Croker I'm coming, Harry said. Not tonight, not this week. But I'm coming, and he should spend whatever time I give him understanding that there's nothing he can build that I can't take apart, and that the only question left is how many good men he's going to feed into the door in front of me before he admits it. You can tell him that is the net. It's the last true thing you'll get to pass up the line. He walked to the door and paused and did the one merciful thing left in the room because Orm had taught him that mercy shown to a broken enemy is worth more than the enemy. For what it's worth, I know you meant it. That's the worst part, isn't it? You meant every word every time and it was still a cage. Go home, Gawain. Don't be in the building when I come. He left. Behind him, the head of the Auror office sat alone at another man's desk with 2 full glasses and no one to drink with, and did not move for a long time, and this was the last conversation the 2 of them ever had, though neither of them said so because the saying would have made it a thing that could be mourned, and Robards had lost the right to mourn it the morning he let Harry's first honest question become a hunter in a corridor. Miriam Sable did not beg and did not reason. She sent a card. It arrived at Grimmauld Place the next morning by no owl and through no ward, simply present on the desk where Robards' untouched whiskey had stood the night before, a plain gray rectangle in a hand Harry had heard turning in a cold lock. It said, "The Granger woman takes the 8:15 from her building to the ministry alone on foot, 4 minutes of it along the river where no one can see. I have watched her make that walk 9 times. I have not touched her because I do not touch what I do not need to touch. Come and discuss the arithmetic of that sentence with me. St. Bartholomew the Less, the Old Chapel Noon. Come as you are, bring whatever you like. I am not going to try to take you today. I want to look at you first. M. Sable." He went. Orm told him not to and then told him he would have gone too, which was the truest thing the old man ever said about the 2 of them. The chapel was disused and cold and smelled of stone and pigeon, and Sable was standing at the center of it alone, her hands folded, her wand nowhere in evidence, and she watched him come up the aisle with the flat total attention Harry had noted in the round room, the motionlessness of a thing that will not move until it moves entirely. "You unmade a warrant of exception before it was drawn," she said without greeting. "I have been doing this work for 26 years and I did not know that was possible. I have spent 3 days deciding how I feel about a man who can reach into the Constitution and ask the world to forget a page of it, and I have arrived at a conclusion, and the conclusion is that you cannot be permitted to exist and that I like you and that the second thing does not alter the first by 1 degree. I wanted to say that to your face." Professionals should understand each other. You threatened Hermione, Harry said. I noted a fact about Hermione. There is a difference, and you of all people know it because you spent the night before last noting facts about Robards until the man came apart. I don't have your gift. I can't feel you when you don't want to be felt. You walked into this chapel and I knew it only because I saw the door move. In 26 years, no one has ever done that to me, and it means every instrument my office has is useless against you. And it means I'm going to win this the only way that is left, which is the old way, the way that worked on men far more dangerous than you long before anyone thought to bury the root. She unfolded her hands. You have a warden's power and a man's heart. You cannot hide the second thing because the second thing has a name and an address and takes the 8:15 along the river. I cannot catch you, I do not have to. I only have to make the price of what you want higher than you are willing to pay, and you have given me a great deal to price it with. A red-haired Auror who would die for you. A woman in the department who is already committing treason for you and does not think I know. A minister who slipped his own guard 3 nights ago to stand on a bridge with you, which I also know and which I have not yet decided what to do about. Her voice did not rise, it never rose. I am telling you this plainly because I respect you, and because I want you to make the correct decision from full information, the way Croker offered it and you refused. Walk away, take the oath, grow old, and every person you love grows old too. Or come for the codex and win perhaps because you may well be able to and stand in that chamber holding everything you wanted, and understand in the same moment exactly what it cost, because I will have spent it by then, all of it, every name and address, and I will have done it without hurry and without anger as a professional, because that is the only lever left against a man who cannot be caught. His people, now, have I made myself understood? Harry looked at her across the cold chapel and did not reach for the root and did not raise his voice and matched her register exactly because Orm had taught him that the way you answer a cold thing is to be colder. You've made yourself understood, Harry said. Now understand me. You've just told me that the only weapon you have left is the people I love, which means you've told me precisely where to look to see you coming and precisely what I have to build to make you useless. You think a man's heart is a handle. It is for a man who leaves it lying about. I'm not going to leave it lying about. I'm going to take the people you named and I'm going to put them somewhere your office has never been able to reach anything behind the same nothing you can't feel me through, and then your one remaining lever is going to close on empty air and you'll be standing exactly where your 4 trackers stood in the reeds, a professional at the center of a circle, realizing the ground is gone. You should have kept that thread in your pocket, Miriam. You spent the last card in your hand telling me the game, and I don't think a woman who's never lost quite understands yet that she just did. Something moved very slightly at the corner of Sable's mouth, not warmth, the acknowledgement one duelist gives another for a touch cleanly scored. We'll see, she said, which was Orm's phrase in a colder mouth, and Harry marked that the 2 oldest and most disciplined practitioners of the buried art he had met, the last warden and the last custodian, had arrived across a lifetime at exactly the same 3 words, and that this told him something true about where the road he was on came out. He left her standing in the empty chapel, and he did not turn his back on her until the door, and she let him keep that, one professional to another. Kingsley found him 3 nights later, which should not have been possible, and was, because Kingsley did not come as the minister. He came alone at night to a bridge over the Thames that Harry had taken to walking because moving water carried a thread of the lay and the stillness came easier above it. And he came without escort and without his chain of office and without, Harry noted, telling Sable, because Sable would never have permitted the Minister for Magic to stand unguarded within reach of the most dangerous man in Britain, which meant Kingsley had slipped his own security to be here, which meant this was not the government talking. I can't stop them, Kingsley said without preamble, watching the black water instead of Harry. I want you to hear that from me and not from the prophet. I am the Minister for Magic, and there is precisely one thing in this country I am forbidden by the founding constitution to command, and you have become that thing, Article 40, the custodian's answer to no minister. I have read it now properly for the first time, and it is a very old and very clever piece of law, and it means that whatever Croker and that woman decide to do to you I cannot lawfully prevent, and if I try I am the one who is removed quietly for the good of an interdict most of my own government has never heard of. He turned, finally. So I am not here as the minister. I am here as a man who fought beside you when you were 17 to ask you one question and to believe your answer because I have earned the right to at least ask. Are you going to become the thing they say you are? Because I have read what happened the last time, the Sundering, and I have spent my whole life believing that the worst governments are still better than the best warlords, and I need to know from your own mouth whether I am looking at a man who's going to prove me right. Harry considered him, this large, tired, honorable man who had been handed a government held together by a buried lie, and had tried, in the narrow room the lie left him, to be decent inside it. I'm going to take the codex, Harry said. I'm going to end the custodian's power to hunt people like me and bury people like Orm and lie to people like you about the shape of the world you're supposed to govern. And then I'm going to do the hardest thing, Kingsley, the thing the last age couldn't do, which is stop. I'm not going to rule anyone. I don't want your chair. I don't want your building. I want the lie ended and the choice returned, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that a man can hold this much and not become the Sundering, because that proof is the only thing that makes ending the lie worth the risk. You want to know if I'll prove you right. Here's the honest answer, and it's the only one worth having. I don't know, neither did any of them. but I'm the first one in 300 years who's afraid of the right thing and who's been taught hour by hour how to hold the line and who wants the ending more than the power. That's not a guarantee. There isn't one. But it's more than Croaker can offer you because Croaker's whole plan is to bury it again and pray no one else is ever born who notices the salt. I'm offering you the other thing. A world that knows what it's standing on. It's more dangerous. It's also true, and you spent your whole life deciding that the truth was worth the danger or you wouldn't have fought a war you could have sat out. Kingsley looked at him for a long moment over the black moving water, and then he did a thing that no one watching, had anyone been watching, would have believed of a sitting minister for magic. He inclined his head very slightly, the way one soldier acknowledges another across a line that cannot be uncrossed. Then I can't help you, Kingsley said, and I won't hunt you, and I'll spend whatever's left of my authority making sure that when this ends, whatever way it ends, there's still a government standing to inherit whatever you leave. That's all I've got. Don't make me regret it. And Harry. He was already turning to go, already gathering the ordinary night around himself the way powerful men learn to become invisible without any magic at all. The last time someone stood where you're standing and said he only wanted to end a lie and return a choice, his name was on the other side of a war I fought in. I don't think you're him. I've decided to believe you're not. But every man who ever became him also began by being sure he wasn't. Hold your line, for all our sakes, hold it. He walked away into the London dark, and Harry stood above the river with the lay threading cold and bright under the black water, and understood that the Minister for Magic had just in his way given him the only thing the office had left to give, which was permission to go and do the thing the office was forbidden to do itself, and that from tonight there was no one in the whole apparatus who could put him back in the box, because the two men with the standing to try had each, in their different ways, stepped aside, one in grief and one in something graver, and left him alone on the near side of the last door with nothing between him and the codex but a woman with a knife, an old man with an oath, and the small matter of not becoming the thing he was born able to be. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The untraceable hand. The first move in a war fought against a hunter you cannot let touch the people you love is to put the people you love somewhere the hunter has never been able to reach anything at all. Harry did it in a single night, and he did it in the open, which was itself the point. He gathered them at Grimmauld Place, the one Sable had priced. Hermione, who came knowing exactly what she was choosing, Ron, who came because Harry had asked and because a promise made over flat beer was still a promise, and the wider tangle of the Weasleys, who came because Molly Weasley had heard that Harry Potter was in trouble, and no force the Ministry could bring to bear was equal to that woman's certainty that a boy she had half-raised was going to be fed and protected whether he liked it or not. They filled the old drawing room, wary and loud and alive, and Harry stood among them and understood that Sable had been right about one thing and wrong about the thing beneath it. His heart was a handle, but a handle can be taken off the door. I'm not going to explain all of it, he told them, because some of it would put you in more danger to know than not to know, and I've spent my whole life on the wrong end of that sentence, so I'll only use it when it's true, and it's true now. What I'll tell you is this. There are people who can't reach me, and who have decided to reach me through you, and I'm not going to let that happen, and the only way I know to make it not happen is older and stranger than anything the Ministry taught me, and I need you to trust me for one night the way you trusted me in a tent in a forest in a great many burning rooms, and let me do a thing that will feel wrong and hold still while I do it. Then he took the house, and he took the people in it, and he folded them out of the world. He had learned the warding from Orm across the long fenland weeks. The persuasion worked upon threshold and stone, but he had never worked it at this scale, on a whole house full of breathing lives, and he found as he began that the difference between Orm's cottage and this was the difference between convincing a stone and convincing a family. He stood in the center of the entrance hall where Walburga's portrait hung gagged and silent, and he sank into the stillness, and he let the tide come up through the foundations of the old house, up through the London clay and the buried river and the deep gold seams, and he did not spend it in a burst. He spent it slowly, a cup at a time, the way a man builds a fire he means to keep all winter, and he spoke to the house. He named it. Not its address, which the Ministry owned, but its true name, the name that was the sum of every life it had sheltered, and every grief it had held, and every stubborn refusal it had learned across 3 centuries of blacks and one exhausted Potter. And the house heard its true name spoken aloud for the first time since it was raised, and it woke all the way up. Every stone of it, every warded joist the Order had layered on, and every older, deeper ward the blacks had worked into the bones of it. And it turned toward Harry the way the deep thing under London had turned toward him in the dark, attentive, ancient, willing. And Harry asked it in the true speech not to be found. Not to be hidden, which is a thing that can be searched for, but to be forgotten, to slip a single degree out of true with the map of the world, so that a person walking the length of the street would feel, without knowing why, that there was nothing here worth the stop, that the row ran unbroken from 11 to 13, that the ache of curiosity simply declined to arrive. The house obeyed. It went out of the world like a held breath let slowly go, and the whole warm loud tangle of the people inside it went with it. And when it was done there was a place in London where the most beloved people in Harry Potter's life sat drinking Molly Weasley's tea, and no instrument the custodians owned, no tracker, no oath, no field unspeakable with a lifetime of training could ever again find so much as the doorstep, because you cannot track a thing the world has agreed to forget. Inside, the family felt nothing. That was the strangeness of it, the thing that would have told any watching warden how completely it had been done. The lamps did not gutter, the tea did not cool. Molly Weasley went on cutting bread at the kitchen table and scolding George for something a decade old, and the fire kept the grate. And the whole warm human racket of the room carried on inside a house that had, in the space of a held breath, stepped 1 degree out of true with the entire world and taken them with it, unharmed, unhurried, unaware. Only Ron noticed, and only because he had spent a war learning to read Harry's face, and he came to the hall doorway and stood in it and looked at his friend standing alone in the center of the entrance hall with the whole tide banked behind his eyes, and did not ask and did not flinch and said only quietly so the others would not hear, "You look like you did in the tent, when you were carrying the thing round your neck and not sleeping. Whatever this is costing you, mate, I'm on the inside of it now, so let it cost both of us." Then he went back to his mother's bread and left Harry standing in the one house in Britain that no longer existed, and the plain unremarkable loyalty of it was, for a moment, harder to bear than anything Sable had threatened. Hermione found him afterward on the landing, gray-faced with the aftermath of watching magic she had spent her life being taught was impossible. "They'll notice the house is gone," she said. "Sable will notice. I want her to notice," Harry said. "I want her to stand in the street where the door used to be and understand that her one remaining lever just closed on nothing. That's not hiding, Hermione, that's a message. I've taken the handle off the door, and now she has to come at me directly in the dark, in secret, one professional against one warden, on the only ground where I can't lose, and she's clever enough to know it the second she sees the empty street." He looked at her and let some of the weight show, because she of all of them had earned the truth of what this was costing. "You can leave whenever you want, all of you can. The forgetting lets people out as easily as it keeps the ministry from getting in. It's not a cage. I've had enough of cages to last several lives. It's just a wall you can stand behind while I take the thing apart." Hermione was quiet for a moment, looking out over the banister at the warm, crowded rooms below, at the family she had helped him carry out of the reach of the world. "You know what frightens me," she said. "It isn't the power. I've watched you do impossible things all night, and none of it frightened me. What frightens me is how calm you are. You just folded a house full of people out of existence, Harry, and your hands aren't even shaking, and a year ago you couldn't sign a report without hating yourself for the lie in it. Something's gone quiet in you that used to be loud, and I can't decide if it's discipline or if it's the first inch of the thing everyone's afraid you'll become." She looked at him. "Tell me it's discipline." "It's discipline," Harry said, "but you're right to check, keep checking. That's the job I'm actually giving you, more than the treason, more than the marginalia. You're the one who gets to ask me that in that exact tone of voice whenever you feel the quiet spreading, and I'm going to answer you every time, and the day I get impatient with the question is the day you should be frightened, because that's the day it stopped being discipline." "Deal, deal," she said, and did not look entirely reassured, which was, he thought, precisely why she was the right person to have asked. The darkest room in the House of the Root was exactly as dark as Orm had warned, and Harry stood in the doorway of it a long time before he went in. "You want to reach a keeper's oath," Orm said. They were in the sanctuary now too, Grimmaild's forgotten library, because the Fens were gone and this was the only unfindable ground left in Britain. And the irony of teaching the buried art inside a house Harry had folded out of the world was not lost on the old man, who seemed at the end of his life to have developed a taste for irony he had denied himself for 90 careful years. "So, understand what an oath is in the deep grammar before you decide whether you are willing to touch one. A spell is a knot tied in the world, an oath is a knot a man ties in himself. When Croaker swore the custodian's oath, he did not cast a spell outward. He reached into his own name, the true one, the sum of everything he is, and he tied the keeping of the interdict into it so tightly that the oath and the self became one strand, and now there is no Saul Croaker who is not the keeper, and no keeper who is not Saul Croaker, and to unmake the one is to unmake the other. That is why it holds. You cannot sunder his oath the way you sundered the warrant from outside, because there is no outside. The oath is not on him, it is him. Then it can't be done, it can be done." And now Orm's gold eyes had gone very steady, the eyes of a man laying a loaded thing on a table between them. "There is an art, the oldest and the worst. It is the naming turned all the way inward, the speaking of a man's true name not to command him but to unmake the knot he has made of himself, to reach into the strand where the oath and the self are wound together and ask the root to remember that they were once two things, and the root will do it. But the root has no more mercy in the unwinding than the sea has in the drowning, and it cannot tell which strand is the oath and which is the man, because they are not any longer two strands. So when you unwind the oath, you unwind the person. You do not kill him, it is worse than killing him. You leave a living man with the shape of a keeper cut out of him, and everything that was tied up in the keeping, his discipline, his memory of why he chose it, his sense of who he has been for 31 years, comes away with the oath in your hand, and what is left sits in a chair and does not know its own name, because you have taken the true one and it did not survive the taking. That is the darkest room. That is how you open the seal by force. And it is why I did not show it to you until you had already understood on your own that there might be another way, because a man who learns this art before he learns to fear it becomes, very quickly, the reason the interdict exists." Harry stood in the dark of the forgotten library and looked at the thing Orm had laid on the table and felt the pull of it, the terrible ease of it, the way it solved every problem at once. He could walk into the department and take Croaker's oath out of him in a single unwinding and be standing in the oubliette before the man finished sliding to the floor. It would work. It would be clean from the outside, no blood, no curse, a warden and an old man and a chamber that suddenly had no keeper. And it would be the exact moment he became the thing Kingsley had stood on a bridge and begged him not to become, The moment the discipline meant nothing because discipline that breaks the first time it is genuinely tested was never discipline, only convenience. He stood with it longer than he wanted to. That was the honest and dangerous truth of the darkest room, the thing he would not have admitted to Kingsley on the bridge, that the art did not repel him, it drew him. He could feel the shape of Croker's oath already in his mind, could feel how the reaching would go, the single clean unwinding, the problem of the last door solved forever between one word and the next, and the drawing of it was not a temptation the way a warm bed is a temptation to a tired man. It was a temptation the way the ocean had been on the night Orm let him hold it, a gladness reaching up to meet his gladness, an ease that fit the exact shape of the hunger in him and asked, reasonably in his own voice, why he would choose the long, cold, harder road when the short one lay open and would work. He let himself feel all of it, standing in the dark, because Orm had taught him that the man who refuses to look at what tempts him is the man it eventually takes from behind. He looked at it directly. He held it in his hand and turned it over and understood exactly how good it would feel and exactly what it would cost and exactly how easy the second time would be, and then he set it down on purpose as he had set down the tide in the ring of stones, cup by cup, until the gladness had nothing left to pour into. No, Harry said. Orm let out a breath that had 90 years in it. Say why? I need to hear the why, or I have taught a weapon and not a warden. Because it works, Harry said. That's the why, because it's easy and it's clean and it solves everything, and every single person who ever tore the world open started with a room exactly like this one and a problem it solved perfectly, and told themselves it was just this once, just this one oath, just this one man who was in the way of something that mattered. The room isn't dangerous because it might fail. It's dangerous because it works, and because after it works the second time is easier than the first, and there's no bottom to it, the same way there's no bottom to the drawing. You didn't teach me to fear the ocean because I might drown. You taught me to fear it because it's glad to come. This is glad to come too, I can feel it. So no, I'm not going to unmake a living man's soul to save myself the harder path. I'm going to find the harder path, that's the whole point of me. That's the only thing that makes me different from the last age, and if I set it down the first time it's genuinely expensive, then Croker's right and Sable's right and the interdict should hold and they should bury me with the rest. Orm was quiet for a long moment in the dark, and then he did a thing Harry had not seen him do, which was to bow his head briefly the way a man bows to something he has waited his whole life to be sure was real. Then we find the harder path, Orm said. And I will tell you now that I did not know if you would choose it, and that I have taught 9 students across a long life and shown that room to 3 of them, and you are the first who walked back out of the doorway, and the other 2 are the reason I stopped taking students. Now, if you will not take the keeper's oath by force, then you must make the keeper set it down himself of his own will, which no custodian has done in 300 years, and to do that you must give a man who has built his entire self around never setting it down a reason to choose to. That is not an art of the root. That is the older art, the one your kind never needed a wand or a codex for. That is simply understanding a man better than he understands himself and being willing to be patient and being willing to be cold. You have all 3, let us go and use them. He requested the meeting through Hermione, which told Croker 3 things at once, and Harry meant it too. It told Croker that Harry had a person inside the ministry, which Croker had suspected and now had confirmed, and which cost Harry nothing because Hermione was already behind the forgotten wall each night and beyond the reach of any consequence. It told Croker that Harry wanted to talk rather than to strike, which was information, and information offered freely is a way of establishing that you have enough of it to give some away. And it told Croker the venue, which Harry chose with care, the round windowless room with the worn pale ring in the floor, the custodian's own ground, because a man who asks to meet you on your own most defended ground is telling you that he no longer regards your ground as defended. Croker came alone. That was its own message, returned. He sat at the table with no head and no foot, and Harry sat across from him. And for a moment the 2 of them simply looked at each other, the keeper of the closed thing and the man who had come to open it, and there was in the silence a strange, cold, mutual courtesy, the recognition between 2 people who have correctly measured each other and found the measurement large. You folded a house out of the world, Croker said, with people in it. Miriam stood in the street for an hour. She has not been unable to find something in 26 years. You have aged her a decade in a week, and I did not think anything could. He folded his hands. You did not come here to gloat. You are not the type, which is inconvenient because the gloating type makes mistakes. So, say the thing you came to say. I'm 78 and I have buried 9 people and I would like very much not to make it 10, and if you have found a road that does not end in your death or mine, I am old enough to want to hear it. I came to tell you that you've already lost, Harry said, and to explain why so that you can spend whatever time is left choosing how you lose instead of whether. That's the only choice you have now, and it's a real one, and I'd rather you had it than not. He leaned back. Your entire power rests on one thing, not the oath, not Sable, secrecy. The interdict works because no one knows there's an interdict. The rationing works because the flock doesn't know it's being rationed. Every witch and wizard in Britain believes magic comes out of a wand the way water comes out of a tap, because you've spent 300 years making sure they believe it. And the entire authority of this ministry, its right to license and register and permit and forbid, rests on that one belief that what you allow them is all there is. Take away the belief and you don't have a rebellion, Croker, you have nothing. You have a government that has been caught with its hand on a valve it swore didn't exist, rationing an ocean and calling it the weather. Croker said nothing. His pale eyes had gone very still. Here's what you know that I know, Harry went on, level, patient, laying it out the way a man lays out a proof he has already checked. You can't move against me openly. The moment you bring the real ministry to bear, the moment there's an inquest, a trial, a public hunt for the man who can bend a mile of reeds without a wand, you have to explain what I am. And the instant you explain what I am, the secret's out, and the secret is the whole game. So you have to fight me in the dark, in secret, with a handful of field unspeakables and a woman who can't find me, on the one battlefield where a single untraceable warden beats your entire office every time. Your secrecy was your armor for 300 years. I've made it your cage. You cannot use the size of your institution against me because using it means exposing it, and exposing it ends it. So it's just you and me and Sable in the dark, and you already know how that ends because you've read the report from the Fens, and I let 3 of them live specifically so you'd have the report. And if I decide, Croker said quietly, that exposure is the lesser catastrophe. That a ministry caught rationing is survivable and a warden loose in the world is not. What then? You have assumed I would rather keep the secret than stop you. That is a large assumption to bet your friends' lives on. I've assumed nothing, Harry said. That's exactly the choice I came to give you. Expose the secret to stop me and you spend the one thing your office exists to protect, and you'll have done my work for me, because once the world knows the root is real, it's never going back in the ground, not in 100 years, not in 1,000, and everything the conquered bought with 3 centuries of lies is gone in an afternoon spent by you to stop one man. Or keep the secret and fight me in the dark and lose because you will. Those are your 2 roads, Croker. Both of them end with the interdict broken. The only thing you still get to choose is whether it breaks loud or quiet, and whether you're standing next to me when it does or buried under it. I genuinely rather you chose to stand next to me, not because I need you, because you've spent 31 years being the only man in Britain who understood the real shape of the world, and it would be a waste to lose the only other person who knows what we're actually arguing about. And when you have it, Croker said, the Codex, the whole grammar undivided in a Peverell hand for the first time since the conquered, what then? You say you do not want my chair or the minister's building. I believe you, which frightens me more than ambition would, because ambition is a thing I know how to bargain with and yours is not ambition. So tell me what a man does with the completed lore of the root once no one alive can stop him having it, and tell me why it does not end the way it ended the last time, with a valley of the drowned and a thinning veil and things coming through that I have spent my life making sure the word for is never spoken. I burned most of it, Harry said, and watched that land because it was not the answer Croker had braced for. Not all. The sundering histories, the true names of the deep places, the workings that let a man draw his whole strength at once, the darkest room, the arts that only exist to end the world faster than you can regret starting, all of that goes into a fire I make with the last thing I take out of that chamber, and no one ever reads it again, not me, not a student of mine, not a ministry that decides in 100 years that it needs a weapon. You buried it because you couldn't trust anyone to hold it. You were right not to trust the holding. Where you were wrong was thinking burial was the only answer to a thing too dangerous to hold, because burial isn't destruction, burial is just a locked room with a key, and a locked room with a key is a promise that someone someday opens it. I'm not going to bury it, Croker, I'm going to end it. The parts that can only ever be the sundering I take out of the world the way I take a curse, so completely that they were never made, and then the one thing your whole order exists to guard against stops existing, not sealed, gone, and you can retire because there's nothing left to keep. And the parts you do not burn. The parts that are only what magic actually is under the ration. Those I keep and those I teach carefully to people I've spent years being sure of, one at a time the way Orm taught me, so that the knowledge that the world runs on an ocean and not a tap doesn't die with the 2 of us and doesn't get buried again by the next frightened institution. Not an army of wardens. A memory of them, enough that the lie can never be fully rebuilt and few enough that the sundering can never come again. That's the balance, Croker, not your grave and not the last age's bonfire. The narrow road between them that nobody's ever had the discipline to walk, because everyone who could reach the Codex was either too frightened to hold it or too hungry to burn it, and I'm the first one who's neither, and that is the entire reason I'm the one it has to be. The old man sat with it for a long time, and the blue flames stood unflickering in their brackets, and the great machine breathed under the floor, and when Croker finally spoke his voice had changed, had lost the practiced sincerity and arrived somewhere older and more tired and more true. You have found the flaw, he said. I have known it was there for 31 years, every keeper knows it. It is the thing we do not say aloud even to each other. The secret cannot survive being defended in the open, and so it can only be defended in the dark, and the dark is exactly where your kind is strongest, and one day we have always known someone would be born who saw it clearly and had the discipline to use it, and we prayed it would not be in our tenure, every one of us, for 300 years, and it has come in mine. He looked at Harry and there was no performance left in him. So you have checkmated the institution. I concede the institution, but you have not checkmated me, Mr. Potter, and you have made one error, one in an otherwise flawless accounting, and I am going to let you find it yourself, because you are the first mind in my lifetime worth the courtesy of a fair game. Go and take your Codex. The way is open to you now, the way you cleared yourself, and I will not expose the secret, and I will not send the office, and I will meet you at the last door with nothing but what a keeper is, and we will see whether the flaw you found in us is the only flaw on the board. Harry went into the Department of Mysteries that night by the method he did everything now, unfound, unfelt, a nothing walking through the most watched building in Britain, and he learned the truth of what Croker had conceded in the shape of what Croker had not. The way was open. That was not a trap and not a lie. The outer machinery of the department simply did not register him because it was built to register magic, and he made none it could hear. He walked the black corridor with the blue flames and the doors without handles, past the room of the veil where something whispered his Peverell blood, past the room where a bell jar held time running backward and none of it reached for him, and he understood that Croker had told the truth, that the custodians had never needed the building to defend the Codex, because the building defended against wands and the Codex had never been threatened by a wand. The oubliette was at the end, behind the last door that was not a door, and it was ringed by defenses, and the defenses were made things, and made things could be unmade. Miriam Sable was waiting for him in the antechamber. She stood between the last door and the rings of warding, alone in the no color of the department, with her wand out for the first time Harry had seen, and he understood the whole of it at a glance, because by now he understood her. That Croker had conceded and that she had not, and that she had come here against her keeper's word, off every book, on the single correct guess that a hunter who cannot track her quarry must instead go and stand at the one place the quarry cannot avoid and wait for as long as it took for the prey to walk to her. He told you to let me have it, Harry said. Croker, he conceded the board this afternoon, you're here anyway. He is old and he is tired and he has decided that losing with dignity is a kind of winning, Sable said. It is not, it is losing. I have kept this interdict alongside him for 26 years and I did not spend one day of it so that at the end he could hand you the keys and call it wisdom. He can concede the institution is not the thing I swore to. I swore to the shut door and I am standing in front of it and I cannot find you and I cannot feel you and I cannot catch you and none of that matters in the slightest right now because you have to come through the space I am standing in and I do not have to find a man who has already come to me. She raised the wand. I have thought a great deal about how to kill something I cannot track. The answer turned out to be simple. You make it come to a room and you fill the room. She filled the room. It was not one curse. It was a working she had clearly built for exactly this. For the one target her whole art could not otherwise touch, and it came off her wand not as a bolt but as a flood, a saturation of the entire antechamber with lethal intent, a dozen curses braided into a single expanding sphere that did not need to aim because it left no space unfilled, a killing pressure that swelled outward to press against every stone and every inch of air in the sealed room at once. So that there was no dodging it and no stillness deep enough to hide inside it because it was not looking for him. It was simply becoming everywhere he could be. Harry did not dodge and did not hide. He sank instead all the way down into the stillness, deeper than he had ever gone, down to the cold floor of himself where the tide ran, and he did not reach for one curse in the flood because there was no one curse, there was only the flood, and so he reached for the flood itself, for the single vast intention that had tied all of it together, the will of a woman who had decided to fill a room with death, and he found its name, the true name of her working. And he asked the root to remember that it had never been made. The room emptied. Between one instant and the next, the killing pressure was not there, unmade at its root. A dozen braided curses returned all at once to the nothing they had been spun from, and the antechamber was only an antechamber again, cold and silent and stone. And Miriam Sable stood in the sudden emptiness with her wand still raised and nothing coming out of it, and looked at the man who had just unmade, in a single reach, the most complete working of her 26-year career. The thing she had built specifically because it could not be countered, and watched it fail to have ever existed. You built a working with no gaps, Harry said quietly, and he had not moved, had not raised a hand, stood exactly where he had stood. That was the mistake. A working with no gaps is a single thing, and a single thing has a single name, and anything with one name I can take out of the world in one word. If you'd thrown me 100 separate curses, I'd have had to unmake them one at a time, and you might have reached me on the 99th. You made it easy by making it perfect. He let that land the way Croker let things land. I'm not going to hurt you, Miriam. I keep telling your side that, and none of you believe it, and it keeps being true. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to walk past you and unmake the wards you've spent your life defending one by one, while you stand there and watch, because there's nothing you can do to stop me and we both know it, and the not being able is the thing that's going to teach you what Croker already learned this afternoon. Stand there, watch. And when I leave the last seal standing, the one I won't touch, ask yourself why a man who could take everything tonight chose to leave the one door he'd have to open the wrong way. Then go and tell Croker the answer, because I think it's the thing he's waiting to find out about me. He walked past her. She did not stop him because she could not, and she was too much a professional to spend a gesture she knew was empty, and she stood in the cold antechamber and watched the impossible thing happen in front of her. He stood before the wards and read them the way Orm had taught him to read a knot. There were 9 of them, 9 wards, each raised by Keeper across 3 centuries, each a masterwork of the Ministry's finest sealing magic, layered one over the next like the rings of a felled tree, and any one of them would have held a wand wizard out for a lifetime, and all 9 together were the most formidable defensive working in the wizarding world, and every single one of them was a knot tied by a human hand in the fabric of the world. Harry sank into the stillness. He reached into the outermost ward, found the name of the Keeper's intention that had tied it, the long-dead man's will to keep the closed thing closed, and he did not fight it. He honored it even in the reaching this dead man's 300-year vigil, and then he asked the root gently to remember that the knot had once not been there, and the outermost ward unwound and was gone, not shattered, not broken, simply returned to the nothing it had been made from, and the dead keeper's long labor came apart in Harry's cold and steady hand like a held breath finally released. He unmade 8. He worked through the rings of the felled tree one by one across the long hours of the night, ward after ward after ward, honoring each dead keeper and then asking the world to forget his work. And no alarm sounded because there was no magic being cast for an alarm to hear, only made things quietly ceasing to have been made. And by the gray hour before dawn, Harry stood in the antechamber of the oubliette with 8 of the 9 great wards of the Ministry of Magic unwound and gone. And only the 9th between him and the sealed codex, and the 9th was not a ward, the 9th was the oath. He had known it would be at the last, and here it was, the living self-renewing will of the keeper, the chain of every custodian since 1692 reaching back across the grave. And it was not a made thing he could sunder from outside because there was no outside, and it hummed in the last doorway with the weight of 300 years of dead men who had given their lives to a promise and were still keeping it. And it would not unwind for any honoring because it was not a knot in the world. It was a knot in a man, and the man was alive, and to open it by force was the darkest room, and Harry had walked out of the darkest room and meant to stay out. He stood before the last seal in the gray light and did not touch it. He had cleared the way to it, all of it, the whole 300-year armor of the ministry unwound in a night, and now there was one thing left, and it could not be sundered and it must not be torn, and it could only be set down by a living keeper of his own will, and Croaker had conceded the institution and kept exactly this, the one flaw Harry had not yet solved, and had told him to come and find it, and here it was, humming in the dark, the last door, the living door, the door that was a man. Harry turned and walked back out through 8 empty rings, unfound, unfelt, and left the 9th seal standing because he would not open it the wrong way and he did not yet know the right one. He carried Croaker's words up out of the dark with him and turned them over the whole climb. You have made one error, one, and I am going to let you find it yourself. It was not a bluff. Croaker did not bluff. That was the whole of what made him formidable. He stated true things in a voice built to sound like threats and let a man frighten himself with the truth. So there was an error, a real one, somewhere in the flawless accounting Harry had laid on the table in the round room. And he ran the accounting again as he climbed, line by line, the exposure gambit, the folded house, the 8 unwound wards, the living 9th seal that could only be set down and not torn and could not find it, and understood that not finding it was itself information, because a mind that could not locate its own mistake was a mind looking in the wrong category. He had solved the institution, he had solved the wards, he had solved or would the seal. What he had not solved, what he had not even properly looked at because it did not present as a problem, was the keeper not as an obstacle but as a man 78 years old who had conceded the board with a courtesy that had felt like defeat and might have been something else. He did not know yet what the error was. But he knew now which corner of the board it hid in, and that was the whole difference between losing and not yet having won. Croaker had lost the institution and won the point, and both of them Harry understood walking up through the sleeping ministry into the dawn had known he would and had played the whole night out anyway to the same cold courteous rhythm, because the two of them were the only players left who understood the board, and the game was no longer really about the codex. It was about which of them could bear to do the thing the other one couldn't, and that game was not finished, and Harry rose into the London morning already turning it over, already looking with the reflex that governed him now not at the size of the last door but at its structure, at the 1 hour when a keeper's will was thinnest, at the harder path that did not run through the darkest room, and beginning at last to see the shape of it. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The breaking of the seal. The error was not in the wards, and it was not in the exposure, and it was not in the folded house. Harry found it 3 nights later in the forgotten library when he stopped looking at the seal as a lock and started looking at the chamber as a promise, and the moment he saw it the whole shape of what Croaker had conceded turned over and showed its underside. The oath doesn't keep the door shut, he said. Orm was in the chair by the cold hearth and did not look up from the book on his knee, which was how Harry knew the old man had been waiting for him to arrive here on his own. That's what I assumed, that's the error. I've been thinking of it as a lock, and a lock keeps a door shut, and if you unmake the lock, the door opens and you walk through and take what's inside. But that's not what they built. They didn't bind the door, they bound the codex. The oath keeps the codex in the chamber, it doesn't stop you reading it. Croaker told me the truth when he said the way was open. I can walk in. I can stand over it, I can read every page, and I cannot take it out and I cannot burn it because the binding isn't on the door between me and the lore. It's on the lore itself, tying it to that room across 300 years, and to break that I'd have to unmake the oath, and the oath is a living man, and we've already had that conversation. Yes, Orm said and closed his book. Now you have found it. I could have told you a fortnight ago. I did not, because a thing a man discovers for himself he believes, and a thing he is told he argues with, and we do not have time for you to argue. That is the true shape of the interdict, Harry, and it is far cleverer than a locked door, because a locked door invites a thief and this invites nothing. Any warden strong enough to reach the codex was always welcome to reach it. He could sit in that chamber and read the whole grammar of the root until he was the most learned practitioner since the Concord, and it would do the world no harm because he could never carry a word of it out, and the moment he tried he faced the same wall you face now. Unmake a living keeper's soul and become the reason for the interdict in the act of ending it, or leave the lore where it lies and walk away a scholar. 300 years. Every seeker who ever got that far turned around at exactly the place you are standing. That is why they conceded the building to you so gracefully. The building was never the point. You have won every battle and you are exactly as far from the codex as the day you spoke a name in a chair, because the last wall is not a thing you can fight. It is a thing you would have to become. Harry stood in the dark of the library that no longer existed on any map, and turned it over, and did not despair, because despair was a thing that happened to men who looked at the size of a wall, and he had trained himself across a long, strange season to look only at structure. A wall that cannot be climbed can sometimes be walked around. A wall that cannot be walked around can sometimes be convinced it was never built. And a wall that is neither a lock nor a barrier but a promise a man made to himself, and a chain of dead men behind him, was not, whatever it felt like, a wall at all. It was a sentence. Everything the conquered had built was, in the end, a sentence tied in the world by human hands, and Harry had spent a season learning the one art the founders had buried precisely because it could unsay any sentence ever spoken. And he did not yet see how that art reached the last door, but he had learned to trust the difference between a problem with no solution and a problem whose solution he had not yet found, and this had the shape of the second kind. It had the shape, he thought, of a thing he already knew and had not yet let himself say. "Then I make the keeper set it down," he said. "Willingly. You said it yourself weeks ago. If I won't take it by force, I make him choose to release it. And the only way a man releases a thing he's built his whole self around is if you give him something he wants more than the thing itself. So I don't need to beat Croker. I need to understand what Saul Croker wants more than the sealed door, and I need to be the only person alive who can give it to him, and then the last wall isn't a wall. It's a negotiation. And I've never yet lost one of those to a man who thinks he's already won." "And what," Orm said very quietly, "does a man who has kept a terrible secret for 31 years and is 78 years old and has buried 9 people want more than the door he has given his life to?" "To put it down," Harry said, "to rest. To know that when he dies the burden ends instead of passing to another poor bastard who spends his life the way Croker spent his. He doesn't love the seal, Orm. Nobody could love the seal. He's a prisoner of it, same as the lore is, chained to a chamber by an oath he can't set down because setting it down means the sundering, and he's too disciplined and too decent to risk the sundering to save himself one more year of exhaustion. That's his cage. His whole life is keeping a thing shut that he can never be free of and never destroy and never explain, and doing it alone and knowing the man after him will do it alone too forever. I can end that, not by taking the door, by taking the reason for the door. If I can destroy the only part of the codex that could ever cause another sundering so completely that it was never made, then there is nothing left to keep and the oath has no purpose, and a purposeless oath can be set down without risk, and Croker gets the one thing 31 years of keeping has never once let him have: an ending. He told the rest of them the plan in the Forgotten House before he went, because he had promised Ron the truth first, and because a man who walks toward a thing that might kill him owes the people who love him the chance to say the things that get said at doors. Orm listened without speaking until the end, and then the old man did the thing Harry had known he would do and dreaded and could not refuse. "You cannot catch 3 centuries of the dead alone," Orm said. "I have not told you the arithmetic because I did not want you deciding around it, but you will hear it now in the daylight where decisions are honest. One channel, no matter how wide, no matter how disciplined, cannot hold 300 years of bound while coming loose at once with nowhere to go. It would pour through you and it would not stop, because there is no cup large enough to drink an ocean released in a single instant, and you would be a burned place in the shape of a man before the first decade of the dead had finished coming through. You need a second channel. You need someone standing in the stillness beside you to take half the flood, to bleed off into himself what would otherwise rupture you, and hold it and let it down slow, cup by cup, on the far side after. There is exactly one other person alive who can hold a share of the deepest node in Britain, and he is 91, and he has not drawn his full strength in 40 years, and he is coming with you, and he is not going to discuss it further." "It'll kill you," Harry said. "Drawing that much at your age, you told me, a man your age doesn't survive the drawing." "No," Orm agreed, and there was no drama in it, only the flat piece of a man who has been ready for a long time. He does not. But he was not going to survive very much longer regardless, and he has spent 90 years being the last of a thing alone in a marsh waiting, and he would rather spend his ending helping the first of the next thing walk through the last door than lie down in a bed and go out being nobody's teacher. You gave me a reason to want to see how the story comes out. Let me be in the last chapter of it. It is the only inheritance I have to leave, and you are the only one left to leave it to." Hermione had gone very still, and Ron had put his hand over his mouth, and it was Hermione who said the thing none of the rest of them could. "Is there another way, any other way? I've spent my whole life finding the other way, and I need to know you looked." "I looked," Harry said. "There isn't one that doesn't end with someone chained to that chamber forever, and I won't be that, and I won't let Sable be that, and I won't leave it buried for the next frightened century to guard. This is the way. It's a bad way, it's the only one on the board." He looked at Orm and did not insult the offer by refusing it again. "All right, come with me, hold half the flood, and when it's done, if I can, I'll bring you back up cup by cup the way you taught me, and if I can't, then you'll have spent your last strength on the only thing you ever called worth it, and I'll carry the rest for both of us." "It is more than any student ever offered me," Orm said, "and I have had a great many." Let us go and end a 300-year lie, you and I, and let an old man draw his whole strength one time before the dark, and see at last what a Peverell in his prime does with the door held open beside him. I have wanted to see that my whole life. I did not think I would live to. Come, Croaker was dying. Harry had suspected it in the round room, in the particular economy of a man rationing his last strength, and Sable confirmed it without meaning to, and Hermione confirmed it from a healer's ledger she should not have seen, and in the end Croaker confirmed it himself because Croaker did not waste effort on lies that cost more than the truth. They met a last time at Harry's asking on the near side of the last door. Harry came down through the sleeping ministry in the thin hour before dawn, through the black corridor and the 8 unwound rings that no one had troubled to rebuild because everyone who mattered understood that rebuilding them was pointless, and Cassian Orm came down with him, unfelt, folded so deep into the stillness that even Harry had to remind himself the old man was there, a second nothing walking a pace behind the first. Orm would hold at the mouth of the antechamber in the dark and wait and be a channel when the channel was needed, and until then he would be, as he had been for 90 years, simply the ripple no one could catch. And Harry went on ahead alone and found Saul Croaker sitting in a plain chair in the antechamber of the oubliette, in front of the 9th seal that hummed with 3 centuries of dead keepers, an old man keeping a last vigil at the door of his own life's work. "You worked it out," Croaker said. "I can see it on you. You have the look I have seen twice in 31 years on the 2 seekers before you who got this far and understood the wall. They both turned around, you have not turned around. So you have found a third thing, and I confess, Mr. Potter, that at 78, after a lifetime of certainty, I am curious rather than afraid, which is a gift I did not expect the end to bring me. Sit, tell me the third thing." "I have earned it, and I do not have the years left to be told it slowly." Harry sat in the cold antechamber across from the keeper of the closed thing and told him the third thing plainly, the way you tell a dying man the truth. "You don't want the seal," Harry said. "You never did. You want it to be over. You spent 31 years chained to a chamber, keeping a thing you can't destroy and can't explain and can't ever put down, because putting it down means risking the sundering, and you're too good a man to save yourself one tired year at the price of the world. So you've stayed, alone, and you've known the whole time that when you die it doesn't end, it just passes to Sable or someone like her. Another life fed into the same door forever, world without end, because that's what the conquered built. A cage with no last day. That's the thing I came to offer you, Croaker, not a fight, a last day. I can destroy the part of the codex that could ever be the sundering. The true names of the deep places, the whole strength drawing, the darkest room, everything in that book that exists only to end the world faster than a man can regret it. I can take those out of the world the way I take a curse, so completely they were never written, and I'd need you to help me do it because you know the chamber and I don't, and because a thing done with the keeper's blessing is a thing done cleanly. And when it's gone, the codex is only history. Only the memory of what magic really is under the ration, nothing left in it worth an oath. And then you set the seal down, not because I forced you, because there's nothing left to keep. And the interdict ends the way it should have ended 300 years ago, with the danger destroyed instead of buried, and you get the last day, Croaker, you get to rest. And no one comes after you because there's no door left to keep." The old man was quiet for a long time, and the 9th seal hummed between them, and somewhere far above the sleeping ministry began faintly to stir toward morning. "That," Croaker said at last, "is a very good offer. It is, I think, the offer I would have made if I had been born into your blood instead of mine. And I am going to tell you now the thing I have been letting you walk toward, the error, the last flaw, because you have dealt with me honestly and you deserve to lose honestly if you are going to lose." He folded his hands. "The oath cannot be set down into nothing. That is the thing you have not understood because you have never held one, and I have held this one for 31 years, and I know its weight in a way no reasoning can teach. It is not a lock I can simply open. It is a living current, and it is always flowing, and it flows out of the last keeper and into the next, and it has never once in 300 years flowed into nothing, because a current with nowhere to go does not stop. It floods. If I set this oath down and there is no keeper to catch it, the 3 centuries of bound will behind it. Every dead keeper still holding on across the grave comes loose at once with nowhere to go, and that, Mr. Potter, is a drawing of whole strength on a scale the world has not seen since the sundering, released curdled into the root in a single instant in the heart of London over the deepest node in Britain. You would not be ending the sundering, you would be starting it. So I cannot set the seal down, not because I do not want to rest. Because the only way to set it down without ending the world is to pass it to a keeper who can catch it. And there is exactly one man alive strong enough to catch 300 years of it and not be torn apart in the catching. And he is sitting in front of me, and the moment he catches it he is the keeper, sworn bound, chained to this chamber for the rest of his life, doing precisely what I have done, and the interdict holds in your hands forever. That is the wall, that is the last flaw. You came to free the codex, and the only way to touch it is to become its jailer. I have known it since the Fens. I let you find the rest yourself because you are worth the courtesy. But this last thing I had to tell you because you could not have found it in time, and I did not want you to learn it by feel in the dark, with 300 years of the dead already pouring into you." Harry sat with it and did not answer at once, because the old man had earned better than a quick answer, and because there was, under the strategy of it, a thing between them that had stopped being strategy some nights ago and become the strange grave fellowship of 2 people carrying the same impossible weight from opposite ends. "You spent 31 years alone in the one job on Earth you couldn't explain to anyone," Harry said finally. And you just told your greatest enemy the exact shape of the only trap that could stop him, in full, holding nothing back, because you'd rather lose honestly than win by letting me kill myself in the dark, not understanding what I was doing. Do you know how few men would do that? I've spent my whole life being handled by people who called it protection. You're the first one on their side who ever treated me like I could bear the truth. I'm not going to forget it. I am 78, Croker said, and I have discovered very late that the only companionship available to a keeper is another keeper, and that I have spent my life being unable to have it because the only other people who understood the weight were the 9 I buried and the woman who wants you dead. And now there is you. It is a poor joke of an ending to find the one mind that could have shared the burden in the same season I have to hand the burden to it or watch the world end. But I have made my peace with poor jokes. God knows the interdict is one. He looked at the humming seal 3 centuries of his predecessors, then back at Harry, and the pale eyes had in them something Harry had not seen there before, which was hope, held very carefully, the way a man holds a thing he has taught himself not to want. I do not think you are lying to me about what you would do with the codex. That is the whole of my trouble. If you were a hungry man or a frightened one, I would know exactly how to end this, because I have ended it before. But you are neither, and you have found the flaw, and you have not yet found the wall behind the flaw, and I have just handed you the wall, and I find, to my very great surprise, that some tired part of me is on your side of it, and wants you to be cleverer than 300 years of us, and would like, before I die, to be proven a prisoner of a cage that could have been opened all along. Do not make me regret that. It is the last soft thing I have left, and I have guarded it more carefully than the door. Miriam Sable came for him then, because of course she did, because she had never in 26 years accepted a concession, and she was not going to start at the end of the world. She came not alone this time, but with the last 3 field unspeakables the office still had, the survivors of the Fens and one other, all of them sworn, all of them off every book, all of them having decided, the way true believers decide, that a warden at the very door of the Codex was worth spending their lives to stop, even if stopping him was impossible, because impossible was a word for people who had somewhere else to be. They came into the antechamber from the black corridor in the old diamond, and Croker rose from his chair and said, "Miriam, no," and she did not stop, because she had stopped taking Croker's orders the afternoon he conceded, and she filled the room with death for the second time, she and her 3-4 workings braided into one saturation, no gaps, no space unfilled, the killing pressure swelling out to press against every stone. And the ancient thing in the chamber woke. Harry felt it before he understood it, a vast slow stirring under the 9th seal, older than the seal, older than the custodians, and he understood in the instant it began to move that the conquered had not trusted even the oath to be enough, that they had built one last defense into the deepest place, a failsafe woven by the founders themselves and set to wake if ever the Codex came under direct assault. A working that did not need the ministry and did not need exposure and did not need Croker, that had slept under London for 300 years waiting for exactly this moment. And it woke now, roused by Sable's flood of death, and it reached for everything in the antechamber that was not the Codex, which was Sable and her 3 and Croker and Harry, all of them at once. An ancient sorcery of unmaking that would scour the room to bare stone and leave the sealed lore untouched in the silence after. Harry went down into the stillness, all the way down, deeper than the Fens, deeper than the night he unmade Sable's first working, down to the cold floor of himself where the tide of the deepest node in Britain ran directly beneath his feet, and he opened himself to it, cup by cup, no longer because there was no time for cups, but with the whole disciplined width of a channel 3 weeks and a lifetime in the making. And he did the thing he had been born able to do and trained never to need, and he became, for one held moment, untouchable. There is no honest word in the language for what it is to stand at the confluence of the deepest node in Britain with the whole ocean rising through you and to want nothing but stillness. The antechamber did not brighten. The change was not a thing the eye could hold. It was the room, and Harry, and the death coming toward him, and the ancient sorcery rising beneath, all of it resolving in the same instant into a single lucid grammar he could read the way a fluent man reads his mother tongue. Each spell and ward and lethal intention laid open to him not as a threat but as a sentence, a made thing, a knot tied by a hand, and every knot in the room, from the newest curse off Sable's wand to the 300-year masterwork stirring in the deep, hung before his widened attention with its true name showing like a seam of ore in split rock. He was not in that moment a man deciding what to defend against. He was the still point a whole storm was breaking over, and the storm was, all of it, only weather, and weather is a thing that can be told in the older speech that it need not have come. The scale of what poured through him should have annihilated him. It did not, because he did not grasp at it. He let it come and let it pass, a channel and not a vessel, so that the ocean moved through the narrow disciplined width of him and out into the work and left him, at the center, unfilled, uncrowded, cold, and entirely at ease. And it was the ease that was terrible, the godlike unhurried ease of a man for whom the most complete assault the wizarding world could mount and the last buried failsafe of the founding age were, both at once, simply 2 more sentences he had the fluency to unsay. He did not block Sable's flood. He unmade it, the whole braided saturation of 4 unspeakables lethal will, found its single vast name and asked the root to remember it had never been made, and the death went out of the room. And in the same reach, the same breath, the same widening of himself past the boundary of his own skin, he turned into the teeth of the ancient failsafe, the Founder's 300-year sorcery rising to scour the chamber, and he read it as it woke, this masterwork of the men who had ended the last age, and he honored it, even in the reading, the terrible care that had gone into it, and then he unmade that too. It did not shatter. It did not rebound. The greatest defensive working of the founding age, woven to survive anything the world could throw at it for 300 years and to wake exactly once, was returned in a single instant to the nothing it had been spun from, unwound at its root by a man standing perfectly still in the center of the room with no wand in his hand and the whole deep ocean of the land pouring up through him and giving off to any instrument that could have been brought to bear nothing at all. The antechamber went silent. The death was gone and the failsafe was gone, and Miriam Sable stood with her 3 survivors and her empty wand and looked at the thing that had just unmade in one motion both the most complete assault her office could mount and the last defense the Founders had left behind. And Harry looked back at her across the cold stone with the tide still banked behind his eyes and did not raise a hand and did not have to. "Miriam," he said, and his voice was very quiet in the ringing silence. "There is nothing in this building, nothing your office can make and nothing the conquered left buried, that I cannot take out of the world in the space of a breath. You've just seen it, your 3 know it. You spent your whole life keeping a door against wands, and the thing you were really afraid of was never a wand, it was this, a man who can ask the world to forget anything you build, and here he is and you cannot touch him and you are right now exactly where your trackers stood in the reeds, a professional at the center of a circle that is already closed. So put it down, not because you've lost your nerve. Because you're the best there's ever been at a job that just ended, and the only dignity left on this board is in seeing that clearly before you spend 3 good lives proving what everyone in this room already knows." Sable stood in the silence for a long moment, and something in her that had held for 26 years, the thing that had never once accepted losing, met at last the one fact it could not argue with, which was the unmade air where her death and the Founder's failsafe had both, an instant ago, ceased to have ever existed. She lowered the wand. She did not lower it in defeat exactly. She lowered it the way a duelist lowers a blade against an opponent who has already demonstrably chosen not to run him through, and the lowering was its own kind of terrible acknowledgement, the last custodian conceding to the first new warden the 1,300 years of the interdict had existed to deny, that the thing they had buried could be held whole by a hand that did not fall. "You could have killed all 4 of us," she said, "just now. The failsafe would have taken us and you let it and then unmade it before it did. You unmade the thing that was about to kill me. Why? Because I've been telling your side the truth since the Fens," Harry said, "and none of you have believed it, and I've decided the only way to make you believe it is to keep being it until you run out of ways to be wrong about me. I'm not going to hurt you, Miriam. I'm not going to hurt anyone in this room. That's the whole thing you've never been able to fit into your accounting, and it's the reason you were always going to lose, because you built your entire art around the certainty that a man who could hold this much would have to be a monster, and I'm standing here holding all of it and I just spent it saving your life, and now you have to go home and live inside a world where that's a thing that happened, and I think that's going to be harder for you than dying would have been." Sable did not answer for a long moment. Her 3 survivors stood behind her, wands lowered now, watching their commander the way soldiers watch the one fixed point they have steered by for years, waiting to be told what a person does when the thing they gave their life to has just been proven wrong in front of them. 26 years, she said at last, and her voice had lost the key in a cold-locked precision, had arrived somewhere plainer and more human than Harry had heard from her. "I have killed 9 people for the interdict, at Croker's word and 1 at my own, and I told myself every time that I was the wall between the world and the second sundering, and that the killing was the price of the wall, and I slept because a professional sleeps. And now you tell me the wall could have been a hand held out all along, and that the only reason it never was is that no one who could hold the door was ever willing to hold it open. I do not know what to do with that. I am not going to thank you for my life, but I am going to do the thing I have never once done in 26 years, which is stand down before the job is finished, because I have finally met the fact I cannot argue with, and a professional who keeps swinging at a fact is not a professional any longer, only a fanatic, and I have watched what fanatics become and I will not become it at the end." She turned to her 3. "Down, all the way down, we are done here. Whatever happens at that door in the next hour is between the keeper and the warden, and it stopped being ours the moment he unmade the Founder's last working and chose not to unmake us with it." She looked back at Harry one final time, and something passed between the last custodian and the first new warden that was not friendship and would never be friendship, but was the next thing along from it, the cold, clean respect of 2 people who had measured each other to the last inch and found nothing left to lie about. "Do not make me wrong about setting this down. If you become the thing I spent my life guarding against, I will find a way to end you, old and beaten as I am, and I will not miss twice, but I do not think I am wrong. I think I have just watched the only man in 300 years who should be allowed to hold it. God help us all if I have misjudged the one that mattered." She left, and her 3 went with her, back up the black corridor into the waking ministry, and did not look back, and this was the moment the custodians of the interdict, as a force set against Harry Potter, ceased to exist, not defeated exactly, but disbanded by their own last commander's honest eyes. which left the seal and the keeper and the last flaw in one gray hour with the ministry stirring awake above them and the codex humming in its chamber and 3 centuries of the dead waiting to be caught. You see the trap now, Croker said. He had not moved through any of it, had stood by his plain chair while the death and the failsafe came and went, an old man watching the end of his life certainty with the calm of a man too tired to be surprised. You can reach it. You have proven past any doubt I could have imagined that you can reach it. And you cannot take it because taking it means catching the oath, and catching the oath means being the keeper, and being the keeper means you are me, Mr. Potter, for the next 50 years chained to this room doing the thing you came to end. I did not build the trap. The founders built it better than they knew. But I have kept it 31 years and I am handing it to you now, honestly, at the last door the way it was handed to me. You may have the codex, and the price of it is that you become the thing you set out to destroy, and there is no third door, and I have looked for one every day for 31 years and there is not one, and if there were I would have taken it, because I am so very tired and I would have liked before the end to rest. He looked at Harry across the humming seal, and there was nothing left in the old face but the truth. So, Croker said, catch it and be the keeper, and the interdict holds in a stronger hand than mine, and I get my last day. Or turn around like the two before you and walk out a scholar and leave it for Sable and for whoever comes after her, world without end. Those are the doors. I have shown you the whole board at last. Choose. Harry looked at the humming seal and, for the length of a slow breath, let himself see it not as an obstacle and not as a trap but as a structure, as he had learned to see everything, and the third door opened in front of him not as an idea but as a certainty, because Croker, in the honesty of the very last move, had told him exactly where it was without meaning to. The oath cannot be set down into nothing. True. The current has to go somewhere, and if it goes nowhere it floods. True. And a living keeper strong enough to catch it becomes bound to keep the door shut forever. All true, all of it, as the founders had drawn the board. But the founders had drawn the board around one assumption they had never questioned, because in 300 years no one had ever been able to test it, that the chain of the dead was permanent. That the 3 centuries of bound keepers reaching back across the grave were fixed weight, a thing to be caught or a thing to be released, but never a thing that could be itself unmade. They had built the whole trap on the dead. And the dead, Harry understood, standing in the gray hour with the ocean bank behind his eyes, were made things. Not living men, not any longer. Bound wills tied across the grave, knots in the fabric of the world exactly like every other knot he had spent a season learning to unsay. He could not sunder a living keeper without becoming the darkest room, but the dead were not living. The dead were the same as a warrant, the same as a ward, the same as any 300-year masterwork of will he had unwound in a single honoring night, and if he unmade the chain of the dead instead of catching it, then the flood Croker feared had a different shape entirely, because there would be no 3 centuries of bound will coming loose at once. There would only be the single living oath in Croker's own tired hand, freed of the dead weight that had made it unbreakable, held now by one man alone, and a single living oath held by one living will is a thing that can be passed gently, cleanly, and reshaped in the passing into a keeper who has sworn not to keep a door shut but to keep the sundering from the world, and who fulfills that oath in the only true way, by destroying the sundering and then having nothing left to guard. That was the third door. Not to catch the oath, to unmake the dead who made it a cage and free the living current, and let Croker set down at last a thing light enough to set down. And the cost of it, the reason no keeper had ever imagined it, the reason Croker had risen from his chair with alarm on his face, was that unmaking 3 centuries of the bound dead in a single working over the deepest node in Britain was a drawing of whole strength so vast that no one channel could survive being the throat it poured through, which was why an old man was folded into the stillness at the mouth of the antechamber, waiting, ready to be the second channel and to spend his life being it. And Harry Potter stood at the last door in the gray hour, untouchable to every made thing in the world and no longer caught at all, and understood that Croker had told him the truth, all of it, and that the only way through was the thing no keeper in 300 years had been able to imagine, which was not to find a third door on the board, but to unmake the pieces the board was built from. He reached out in the stillness and laid his cold, steady attention on the humming seal on the 3 centuries of bound and waiting dead. And he did not catch the oath, and he did not turn around, and he began very quietly to do the thing that would either end the interdict forever or begin the second sundering, and Croker, watching, understood a half-second too late what the third door was, and came up out of his chair faster than a dying man should have been able to move, one hand rising, and said, "Wait, that will kill you," and it was already done, and it was already too late to stop, and the dead were already beginning to come loose. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, The New Balance, the dead came loose. Harry had reached into the 9th seal in the stillness and laid his cold attention on the chain, on the 300 years of bound keepers reaching back across the grave, and he had begun to unmake them as he unmade any made thing, honoring each and asking the root to remember that the binding had never been tied, and the founders had built better than they knew, because the chain did not come apart link by patient link. It came apart all at once, the way a rope under enormous strain does not fray but parts, and 3 centuries of bound will that had held a door shut across the deaths of 9 keepers came free in a single instant with nowhere left to go, and the deepest node in Britain opened under the ministry of magic like a wound in the floor of the world. The city above did not know. That was the horror pressed into the first heartbeat of it, that London went on sleeping in the grey milk floats and early trains and shuttered shops, while under its streets and its buried rivers and its drowned Roman wharves the gold veins convulsed and the substrate of magic itself bucked like a struck animal. And for one instant every ward in Britain shuddered on its foundations, and every sleeping witch and wizard from the Hebrides to the Channel turned in their beds without waking. Chased by a dream they would not remember of the ground coming open, and in a marsh 100 miles away a flat black mirror lifted in a swell under no wind and lay down again, and the world leaned for the length of a held breath toward the shape of an ending it had not worn in 300 years. It was the Sundering arriving. It was the exact catastrophe the conquered had spent everything to bury, unburied now by the one man who had come this far, and it stood over the whole island in that first instant with its hand raised, and there was nothing between it and the second age of ruin but a young man standing perfectly still in a chamber under London who had at last run out of clever moves, and had only the thing Orm had spent a season teaching him and a lifetime being. The discipline to hold what could not be held and to hold it gently, it was the thing the conquered had died to prevent. Harry understood that in the first fraction of the first second, standing at the center of it. This was the exact shape of the sundering whole strength released curdled into the root in one place at one time, and if it poured through a single channel it would rupture him and go on pouring, and the rupture would not stay in the chamber. It would run out along the gold veins under London and under the island and under the sea, and things would come through, and the word Orm would not say aloud in a marsh would become the name of an age again. He took it. He opened the disciplined width of himself and let the flood come, all of it. 300 years of the released dead crashing up through the soles of his feet and his legs and his spine into the channel he had spent a season learning to be, and it was too much, it was oceans past too much. It was a tide that did not rise but detonated, and he felt himself begin to go, felt the edges of the channel start to char. Felt the boundary of Harry Potter thin toward the rumor it had thinned to in the fens and then thin past it, toward nothing, toward the burned place in the shape of a man that was the only fate the founders had left for anyone who reached this door and tried to change its shape. And Cassian Orm stepped out of the stillness at the mouth of the antechamber and drew his whole strength for the first time in 40 years and took the other half. The old man did not speak. There was no time and no need. He simply opened himself, 91 years old, on the far side of the flood and became the second channel, and half the released ocean of the dead turned toward him and poured up through him instead, and the pressure on Harry halved and held and became barely bearably, a thing that two men standing in the stillness at either end of a 300-year catastrophe could hold between them. And Harry felt Orm take it, felt the old man's channel open to its absolute width and the tide come screaming through it, and felt threaded through the roar of it, the thing Orm had told him plainly in the daylight and he had not let himself believe, that a channel that old, drawing that much, does not survive the drawing. Orm was holding half the sundering out of the world, and it was killing him, and he had known it would, and he had come anyway, and he was in the last work of his long-hidden life exactly and finally what he had been born to be, which was a warden of the root, holding the door of the world shut with his own dissolving self so that the man beside him could do the impossible thing on the other side of it. What Harry did on the other side of it has no honest telling because the language was not built for it, but this is the nearest the words will come. He held the flood, half of it, with Orm holding the rest, and he did not spend it and he did not grasp it, and into the roaring column of 300 years of the released dead he reached in the true speech and began to sort them, not to keep them, to free them. Each of the dead keepers was a bound will, a knot tied across the grave, a man who had given his one life to a promise and been held to it past his own death, 3 centuries of them stacked into the chain, and Harry took them one at a time out of the torrent in the eye of a catastrophe with an old man dying beside him to buy the seconds, and he named each of them the true name, the whole of who they had been, and he did not command them and he did not bind them, he thanked them in the older tongue that has a word for it, and he asked the root to remember that a promise kept past death is a debt the world has no right to go on collecting, and he unmade the binding and let each keeper go. They went like sparks up a flue. He felt them go, 300 years of them, keeper after keeper after keeper. Every man who had ever stood where Croker stood and given his life to the shut door, released at last from a vigil that had outlived its every reason, uncurdled, ungathered, let down gently into the root the way Orm had taught him to let down the tide, cup by cup, so that the ocean of them did not detonate but subsided, poured back down into the gold veins under the island not as ruin but as rest. 3 centuries of held breath finally exhaled. And for the span of that unmaking, which felt from the inside like an age and lasted from the outside a handful of gray minutes, Harry Potter was the largest thing that had stood in the world since the sundering and did not fall, and that was the whole of the miracle, the thing the conquered had spent 300 years insisting could not be. He held half the released dead of an apocalypse in a channel no wider than one disciplined man, and with the same attention he reached one soul at a time into the roaring dark and found each keeper by his true name and thanked him and let him go. And the scale of what moved through him in those minutes was beyond any measure the mind is built to take. Oceans stacked on oceans, 3 centuries of bound and grieving will, and he moved through all of it with the cold, unhurried tenderness of a man turning down a lamp. Because the alternative to tenderness was the end of the world, and he had decided, a long time ago in a marsh with mud on his boots, that he would be tender at the scale of gods or he would not hold this at all. It should have made him something other than a man. It did not, and the knot was the entire point of him. The thing Orm had died a few feet away to make possible. The thing 3 centuries of keepers had gone to their graves certain could never exist. A hand large enough to hold the ocean and disciplined enough to pour it out gently, and humble enough in the middle of the fire to thank the dead it was releasing rather than seizing the strength they carried. And there was strength in them, unimaginable strength, 300 years of it pouring through him and offering itself, and he took not one drop of it for his own and let all of it go home. And the deepest note in Britain, which had opened like a wound, closed like a healed one, and the veil that had begun to thin thickened again, and the things that had begun to notice the thinning turned away unfed, and the sundering that had been half a heartbeat from a second age simply quietly did not happen. Because a Peverell in his prime with the door held open beside him had reached into the exact mechanism of the apocalypse and taken it apart with his bare attention and set every piece of it to rest. And when it was done, when the last of the dead had gone up like a spark and the roar had faded to the ordinary deep pulse of the note at peace, there was one thing left in the whole vast quiet where the chain had been, and it was small, and it was warm, and it was the single living oath in Saul Croker's tired hand, freed of the 3 centuries of dead weight that had made it a cage, weighing now no more than one old man's promise, light enough at last to set down. Orm was on the floor of the antechamber. Harry came out of the stillness and crossed to him and went down on his knees on the cold stone, and the old man was looking up at the black ceiling with the gold gone thin and guttering in his eyes, spent hollowed, a channel that had opened to its whole width one last time and let the ocean through and had nothing left. His long young hands were old now, at the very end, the years arriving all at once the way they do when the thing holding them off finally stops. He was not afraid. Harry could see that plainly, and it was the last lesson in the truest, that a man who has made his peace does not need to be lied to at the door. I felt them go, Orm said. His voice was almost nothing. All of them, 300 years of my enemies, and you thanked each one and let him rest. I taught you the sundering to keep you alive. I did not teach you that. Thanking them, that was yours. That is the thing I could not have done because I hated them too much, and it is the thing that made it mercy instead of murder, and it is why the veil held. You found it in the middle of the fire in the 1 second you had, and you did it 300 times without dropping the flood. The thin gold flickered. I have been the last of a thing for 90 years. I am not the last of anything now. That is a gift, Harry Potter. Do you understand what you have given a dying man? I get to die knowing I was not the end, I was the bridge. You were the teacher, Harry said. You were the whole reason I could hold the line. Everything I didn't become because you showed me the room and trusted me to walk out of it. Rest. You've earned the rest more than any of them. I'll carry the memory. I'll teach it the way you taught me, carefully, to people I'm sure of, so the world never forgets what it's standing on and never learns how to tear it open again. I promise, cup by cup. All the way down. Cup by cup, Orm said, and the gold went out of his eyes as gently as a tide going down, and the last warden of the old order died on the cold floor of the chamber he had spent his life kept out of, in the arms of the first warden of whatever came next, and there was for a moment no sound at all in the deepest place under London but a young man's steady breathing and the peaceful pulse of a node at rest. Harry knelt over him a moment longer, and did the only thing there was left to do, which was the thing Orm had taught him to do for the 300 dead, and had never once expected anyone to do for himself. He spoke the old man's true name into the stillness, the whole of who Cassian Orm had been, 91 years of hiding and waiting and refusing to be the last, and he thanked him in the older tongue that has a word for it, and he asked the root gently to remember him, not to bind him and not to hold him, only to remember, so that the last warden of the old order would run in the gold veins under the island for as long as the island stood. A thread of light in the deep that had once been a man who spent his whole life being the ripple no one could catch, and his death being the door held open for someone else. The node took the name and kept it. Somewhere far below in the braided dark, a single new thread of gold joined the others, and Harry felt it settle in and let the old man go. Then Saul Croker, who had watched the whole of it from beside his plain chair, 78 years old and freed after 31 years of the weight of every keeper before him, spoke into the quiet. I felt them leave me, he said. His voice had changed the way a house changes when a great noise that has run under it for years finally stops. The dead, the whole chain. All my life the oath has weighed like a mountain, and I told myself the weight was the price. And just now the mountain lifted off me one keeper at a time, and I am standing here holding a thing that weighs nothing, that weighs one tired old man's promise, and for the first time in 31 years I can feel the shape of setting it down. He looked at Harry across Orm's body, and there was water on the old face and no shame in it. You did not tear it out of me, you freed it. I did not know that was a door. 300 years of us never knew that was a door. Take it then, not the trap, the gift. I set it down of my own will freely, the way no keeper has ever been able to, and I give it to you clean, and I ask you only to be what you told me you would be, because I am going to die in the next few days believing it, and I would like to be right about one large thing before the end. He set it down. Harry felt the freed oath leave the old man like a held breath let go, the single warm living current with nowhere to flood now because there was no chain behind it, only one man's ended promise, and it came to Harry because Harry was the one standing there, and he caught it, and it did not bind him because there was nothing left for it to bind him to. The door it had guarded had no dead behind it any longer. It was just a current in his hands, waiting to be told what it was for. The sealed codex lay open in the oubliette in the gray hour, 3 centuries after the last hand had touched it, and Harry Potter read it. He read it the way you read the one book that contains the true grammar of the world, quickly and completely, the whole undivided lore of the root pouring into a mind that had been built by blood in a season of hard teaching to receive it. And he understood, page by page, exactly why the conquered had buried it, and exactly why the burying had been a crime, both at once, without flinching. Because Orm had told him a lifetime ago in a marsh that a man who could not hold both those truths could not hold the root either, and he could hold both. There was so much of it that was only beauty, the naming of things, the persuasion of stone, the tending of the lay. The arts that made a valley green in a killing winter and turned a plague aside in a night, and let a man speak to the land and be answered, the whole enormous inheritance the wizarding world had been rationed away from and taught to believe was a children's story. And there was the other part, the deep names, the whole strength drawing, the darkest room. The sundering itself, written plain, the exact mechanism of the end of the world, sitting in the same book as the song for turning winter, because the root did not sort itself into good and evil. It was the sea, and the sea was all of it at once. He held the whole of it in his mind for one long moment before he did anything, because he owed the choice that honesty. He could keep it, all of it. The deep names and the whole strength drawing in the darkest room, kept unused, held behind the discipline Orm had spent his death buying, a weapon against the day it was needed, and there is always a voice that sounded exactly like reason said, a day it is needed. Every keeper of every dangerous thing across all of history had heard that voice and kept the weapon for the day, and the day had always eventually come, because a thing kept for the worst day is a thing that teaches the world to arrange a worse day for it. He knew that voice now. He had met it in the darkest room and walked out of the doorway. He listened to it one last time, all the way to the end of its argument, and then he set it down, because the whole of what he had learned in a single strange season came to this one hour and this one choice. That the only safe place for the end of the world is nowhere, that a locked room is a promise of a key, that burial is not destruction, and that the single thing he could do that no keeper in 300 years had been willing to do was to stop guarding the weapon and simply take it out of existence, and be forever after a man who could have kept it and chose not to, which is the only kind of man who can be trusted to have held it at all. Harry took the freed current in his hands, the oath that weighed nothing now, and he did the thing he had told Croaker on the near side of the last door that he would do, and he told the truth when he said it, and he told the truth now when he did it. He reshaped the oath, not keep the door shut. He spoke into the living current in the true speech, the thing it would keep instead, keep the sundering from the world. And then he fulfilled it in the only way an oath like that can honestly be fulfilled, which is not by guarding the danger but by ending it. He reached into the codex, into the part of it that was only ever the end of the world, the deep names and the whole strength drawing in the darkest room and the written mechanism of the sundering, and he unmade it. Page by page, working by working, he found the true name of each world-ending art and asked the root to remember that it had never been written. And the ink did not burn and the pages did not char, they simply, one after another, became blank, became clean, became parchment that had never held those words, until the most dangerous knowledge that had existed since the founding age was not sealed, not hidden, not buried for a frightened century to guard, but gone. Taken out of the world so completely that no ministry in any future could ever decide it needed the weapon. No student, no matter how trusted, could ever be tempted by the room. No second sundering could ever be begun, because the how of it no longer existed anywhere, in any book, in any mind but Harry's own. And Harry had spent a season learning precisely how to hold a thing he would never use. And the rest of it, the beauty, the naming and the persuasion and the tending, the true memory of what magic was under the ration that he kept, that he did not touch, that he closed his hands around and carried up out of the dark, the codex light in his arms now, only history now, only the memory of an ocean, dangerous the way the truth is always dangerous and no more dangerous than that. He came up out of the Department of Mysteries into the full morning, and the balance of the world had changed, and everyone who mattered knew it before he reached the atrium. Kingsley Shacklebolt was waiting at the top, because Kingsley had spent the night not sleeping in the way the powerful learn to not sleep, and had felt, even without a drop of the old blood, the thing that had moved under the city in the gray hour, the way the whole island had seemed for one instant to draw a breath and let it go. He stood by the golden fountain with no chain of office and no guard and looked at Harry come up out of the buried levels carrying a book, and he did not ask what had happened, because it was on Harry the way weather is on a man who has walked a long way through it. Croaker's alive, Harry said. He's dying, but it's his own dying now, not the office's. He set the seal down of his own will, the interdicts over Kingsley, not broken, ended. The thing it existed to prevent can't happen anymore, because I took the how of it out of the world, and the thing it was really protecting, the lie, the ration, the story that magic comes out of a wand because that's all there is, that's over too, because I'm standing here holding the proof that it was never true, and you can't bury me, and you can't bury this book, and you can't bury the fact that it happened. He was not threatening. He had never in the whole long season needed to threaten, and he did not start now. I'm not going to stand in your fountain and announce it to the prophet. That's the sundering's way, tear it all open at once and let the world burn sorting it out. I've had enough of the sundering's way to last several lifetimes. I'm going to do the other thing, the slow thing, The memory of the root survives now outside your control in a handful of hands I'll spend years being sure of the way Orm was sure of me. Not an army, a memory, enough that the lie can never be total again and few enough that the danger can never come again. That's the new balance, Kingsley, not my throne and not your grave. A world with a door left honestly ajar and someone standing near it who can't be moved, who doesn't want your chair, who only wants the truth kept alive and the weapon kept dead. You spent your whole life deciding the truth was worth the danger. Here it is, it's more dangerous than the lie. It's also true. I'll help you carry it if you let me, and I'll be beyond your reach whether you let me or not, and I'd much rather it was the first one. Kingsley looked at him for a long moment in the morning light, at the man who had walked into the one building in Britain built to unmake him and walked out untouchable, carrying the thing 300 years of government had died to keep buried, and offering, of all the things a man in that position could offer, partnership. The last time, Kingsley said slowly, someone stood where you're standing, holding that much, and I told you I decided to believe you weren't him. I stood on a bridge and I said it and I wasn't sure. I want you to know that I'm sure now. I felt what moved under the city last night. I've read enough of the old accounts to know what the second sundering would have felt like, and it would not have felt like that. That was not the world tearing. That was the world being set down gently. A man who wanted to be a god does not spend the apocalypse thanking 300 years of his enemies and letting them rest. He straightened and became for a moment entirely the minister for magic, the office and the man aligned at last on the same ground. So, a world with a door left honestly ajar and a government that has to learn to stand next to a power it can't command instead of one it pretends doesn't exist. That's harder than the lie. It's also the only honest way to run anything, and I have spent 30 years being ashamed of governing a country built on a buried grave and calling the grave the floor. I'll take the harder thing. God help me and God help all of us, but I'll take it because you're right and because I fought a war once for exactly this, the truth against the danger, and I'm too old to pretend I've stopped believing in it now that it's arrived and it's terrifying. He put out his hand. Welcome back, Auror Potter. Or whatever you are now, I don't think there's a word for it. There's an old one, Harry said and took the hand. It's been out of use for 300 years, we'll bring it back slowly. Hermione was waiting for him in the forgotten house, on the stair where she had found him the night he folded them all out of the world, and she looked at him come up out of the wall carrying a book, and she asked him the question she had been carrying since a drink in the back of a pub, the only question that had ever really mattered to her, put now in 3 plain words because the elaborate ones had all fallen away. Did I help, she said, or did I harm? You helped, Harry said. Come and look at what you helped. He set the codex down on the step between them and opened it, and let her see the blank pages where the end of the world used to be, and the intact ones where the beauty was, the naming and the persuasion and the tending, the whole memory of the ocean under the tap. That's the thing you committed treason for, that's what your love bought, not an army, not a throne. A book with the poison taken out of it, and a lie ended without a war, and 300 years of dead men resting instead of curdled into another sundering. You spent months at 3 in the morning asking yourself whether you'd helped a friend become a monster. Here's your answer in your hands. I burned the part of myself that could have been the monster page by page in a chamber under London an hour ago so completely it was never written. You didn't arm a monster, Hermione. You helped a man make sure he could never become one. That's the whole thing you did. I need you to put down the 3 in the morning question now. You've earned the sleep. She looked at the blank pages a long time, this woman who had spent her whole life unable to leave a locked door unpicked, and had for him picked the most dangerous lock in the world and then helped him make certain no one would ever be able to use what was behind it, and something she had carried since the pub, the worst weight of it, finally went out of her shoulders. All right, she said. All right, I believe you. And I'm going to hold you to every word of it for the next 50 years because I've read the histories now, and someone has to be the person who isn't afraid of you and won't flatter you and will tell you the exact hour you start to drift. And that person is me, and I'm very good at it, and you've never once in your life been able to argue me out of a thing I was right about. No, Harry agreed. I never have. Stay right about this one. It's the one that matters. Miriam Sable came to see Croaker at the end, because the keeper and his blade had kept the same terrible secret for 26 years, and there was no one else who could sit with him in it. Harry was there too, in the plain room where the last keeper of the interdict was spending his last honest days, because a strange thing had happened in the space where enmity used to be, and the 3 people left alive who understood the whole shape of what had been buried had found that they could not in the end be strangers, having each given their lives in different directions to the same impossible weight. Croaker was propped up by the window with the afternoon on his face, lighter than Harry had ever seen him, a man who had put down a mountain and discovered he could stand. You disbanded my office, he said to Sable without reproach, almost with amusement. You conceded my war, she said without apology, exactly the same. We are even. And I have spent 3 weeks in a world where the thing I gave my life to was not necessary, and I will tell you, Saul, it is the strangest grief I have ever carried, to mourn a wall that turned out to have a door in it the whole time. But I have decided how I am going to carry it. She looked at Harry. He needs someone to help him be sure of the hands he chooses, the memory keepers. You said a handful, chosen slowly, sure the way the old man was sure of you. You do not know how to be sure of people, Potter. You are 24 and you trust the ones who love you and suspect the ones who don't, and that is a fine way to survive a war and a terrible way to choose who inherits the most dangerous memory in the world. I have spent 26 years learning to see exactly who a person is under everything they show. I found 9 people I had to end. I would very much rather spend whatever I have left finding the ones who can be trusted to hold the door instead. Let the last custodian become the first gatekeeper of the new thing. It is the only shape my life still makes sense in, and I am too good at the seeing to waste it on retirement. Harry looked at her, the woman who had recommended his death for the crime of noticing, and understood that Orm had been right about a great many things and most of all about this, that an institution is a machine for turning people into functions, and that when you break the machine the people are still there and some of them, freed of the function, turn out to have been something the whole time that the function never let them be. Yes, Harry said. I'd be a fool to say no to that, and I've worked too hard to stop being a fool now. Help me choose them, both of you. He looked at Croaker. You've kept a door for 31 years. Spend whatever's left teaching me how it's done properly, so the memory I carry forward has some of the Keeper's wisdom in it and not just the Warden's power. I've got the strength. Orm gave me the discipline. What I don't have is 300 years of knowing exactly how a thing like this goes wrong, and you do, and it would be a waste to let it die with you when it could keep me honest for the next 50 years. Croaker was quiet, looking out at the afternoon, and when he spoke his voice had the ease of a man who has been handed, at the very end, the one thing he stopped letting himself want a long time ago. 31 years, he said. I kept that door alone because the whole design of the thing was that the keeper is always alone. That is the cruelty at the heart of it. One man and a secret and no one to share the weight. And I am going to die in a fortnight in a room full of the only 3 people alive who understand it. One of whom I recommended killing, one of whom I tried to have killed, and one of whom just spent a night thanking my dead and letting them rest instead of tearing them apart to reach the thing I guarded. The interdict spent 300 years making certain no one would ever be able to hold the root without becoming the sundering. And the joke, the last joke, the one I get to die laughing at, is that the answer was never to bury it deeper or guard it harder. The answer was a boy who was handed leash after leash his whole life and got so tired of them that he learned, out of pure stubbornness, to be the one thing none of us believed could exist, which is a man you do not have to leash because he has already, on his own, for his own reasons, decided where the line is and will not cross it if you beg him. He turned from the window and the afternoon was gold on the old face, and he looked at Harry the way a man looks at a thing he spent his life certain was impossible and is glad at the last to have been wrong about. Sit down then, all of you. I have a fortnight and 300 years of how it goes wrong, and apparently I have at the very end, colleagues. Let me teach you the keeping. And let me rest in between in the sun while I still can. I have earned the sun. He taught them for 11 days, in the plain room by the window. 300 years of how the keeping goes wrong poured out at last into the only ears that could hold it. And on the 12th day Saul Croaker died in the afternoon with the sun on his face, and Harry on one side of him and Sable on the other, the keeper and the warden and the blade, and his last words were not about the interdict or the codex or the root. He looked at the light on the wall and he said, 31 years I could not sleep past 4 in the morning, and these last 11 nights I have slept like a child, and I did not know until you took the mountain off me, how tired a man can be and still call it living. And then he was quiet, and then he was gone, and the last keeper of the interdict was buried without a stone, because a stone would have required a name, and the name of his office was the one secret the 3 of them agreed to keep, out of respect, forever. Sable wept once briefly, standing very straight, and then she put it away with the discipline of 26 years and turned to the work of choosing the ones who would carry the memory, because grief, she said, was a thing you honored by not wasting the time it left you. In the weeks that followed, Harry Potter moved through the world a free man in the one way no one in the wizarding world had been free for 300 years, which is to say beyond the reach of the machine, on the near side of no leash at all, holding in himself the whole memory of what magic had been before it was rationed and the whole discipline of never using the part of it that could end the world. He did not rule anything, he never would. That was the line, and he had drawn it himself in a marsh with mud on his boots, and he held it now with the ease of a man who had felt the whole ocean rise through him and chosen cup by cup to set it down. The ministry still stood, Kingsley still governed. The prophet still printed its daily untruths about Quidditch and cauldron thickness, and the great humming machine of the wizarding world went on believing, for now that magic came out of a wand the way water comes out of a tap. The lie was not shattered. It was only finally ended as a certainty because there was a man walking London who was living proof it had never been true, and a dying keeper teaching him how to hold that truth without dropping it, and a cold, brilliant woman learning to choose the few who would carry the memory forward when all 3 of them were gone, and none of them could ever be buried again, because you cannot bury a thing the world has once been made to remember. The gold veins ran under the city in the dark, patient, enormous, no longer entirely forgotten. Somewhere under the Department of Mysteries, a chamber sat with its door open and a book in it that was only history now, its most terrible pages blank forever. And Harry walked home through the London evening to a house that no longer existed on any map, full of people the whole apparatus of the ministry could never find, and let himself in through a wall that agreed for him to not be a wall, and stood for a moment in the warm, loud human racket of the ones he loved, unfound, untouchable, and entirely at peace, a seeker who had gone looking for the thing they buried and come back holding it, and holding more than the power, the harder and rarer thing. which was the line he had drawn across it and would never, for anyone, for any reason, for the rest of his long and quiet and formidable life, allow himself to cross. Chapter 7 End.